Hello everyone and welcome back to the Horror Hut. Now, I know a lot of you use these videos to sleep, so before you drift off I thought it would be a fun idea if everyone can leave a comment to let me know where you are listening from in the world. Also like and subscribe if you are enjoying the episodes. Right, let's get comfy and relax and let's begin. I had always wanted to see Yosemite at night. I'd been drawn to the idea of photographing the stars out there, hoping to catch something spectacular with my camera. So, one weekend, I packed up my gear, drove out to the park, and set up camp in a spot that I thought was far enough away from any trails or other campsites. I wanted the whole place to myself. The day passed quietly. I hiked around, took some pictures of the scenery, and scouted for a good spot to set up for the night. The plan was to stay up late and wait for the sky to clear up enough to get the kind of shot I'd only seen online. When dusk fell, I went back to camp, made some coffee to keep myself awake, and waited until it was dark enough to get started. It was around midnight when I grabbed my gear and my lantern and made my way to an open area I'd spotted earlier. It was quiet, just the sound of a light breeze and the occasional rustling in the bushes. I set up my tripod, checked my camera settings, and took a few test shots. The stars were perfect, and the air felt crisp. I felt like I was in a different world. I must have been out there for an hour, adjusting angles, trying to get the perfect shot, when I saw something in my peripheral vision. At first, I thought it was a tree or a bush casting a weird shadow, but then I noticed it was moving just barely. I turned my head slowly and saw him. There, just outside the reach of my lantern's glow, was a figure. A man, standing perfectly still, watching me. He didn't say anything, didn't move closer, just stood there, half hidden in the dark. My first thought was maybe he was another hiker, but why would he be out here in the middle of the night? And why wasn't he saying anything? I raised my hand in a half wave, more out of politeness than anything else, but he didn't respond. I looked down, fiddled with my camera, trying to shake off the weird feeling, but I couldn't concentrate. I kept glancing back, and he was still there, in the same spot, just watching. I tried to tell myself it was nothing, that he'd probably move along any second, but he didn't. It was like he was waiting for something. I turned my attention back to the camera and took another shot, but my hands felt shaky. It was hard to ignore the feeling that he was still staring. I couldn't help but look over again. This time, he was closer, just a few steps closer, but still outside the light. I could barely make out his face, but he looked blank. No expression, no reaction. Just standing there. I cleared my throat and tried calling out, "Can I help you with something?" Nothing. Not even a twitch. I felt a chill crawl up my spine. I was out there alone, in the middle of Yosemite, with this stranger who wouldn't say a word, just watching. I tried to play it cool, went back to my camera, but my hands wouldn't stop shaking. I took another photo, barely able to focus, and then checked the shot on my screen, trying to ignore the figure just behind me. When I looked up again, he'd moved even closer. This time, he was almost at the edge of the lantern's light. I could see more of him now, a dark jacket, messy hair, just the outline of his face. His eyes, though, they seemed almost empty, like he wasn't really looking at me, but right through me. I felt trapped, the quiet of the forest closing in around me. My mind raced with what to do. I wasn't near any other campers, and my car was back at the main campsite, a good 20-minute walk. I thought about just grabbing my things and leaving, but something about him kept me frozen in place. I didn't want to turn my back on him. Finally, I forced myself to speak again. "Look, man, I don't know what you want, but I'm just here to take photos. I'll be gone soon, all right?" Still nothing. He just kept staring, not moving, not reacting. It was like he was waiting for me to do something, to make the first move. Then, out of nowhere, he took one step forward, just enough that the edge of the lantern's glow caught his face. I could see his eyes clearly now, and something about them didn't seem right. They looked flat, almost lifeless. His expression was blank, like he wasn't even aware he was there, just an empty shell standing in the dark. I couldn't take it anymore. I reached down, grabbed my camera and lantern, and turned to leave. I didn't care about getting the perfect shot anymore. I just wanted to get back to camp, back to some sort of safety. I walked quickly, my footsteps loud in the silence of the night. But then I heard it. Footsteps behind me, matching my pace. I didn't want to look back, didn't want to confirm he was following, but the sound was unmistakable. Every step I took, he took too, just far enough behind me to stay out of the light. I picked up my pace, nearly tripping over my own feet as I hurried back toward the campsite. The footsteps followed, steady and slow, never rushing, just keeping pace with me, like he was in no hurry to catch up, but wanted to make sure I knew he was still there. My heart was pounding so hard it felt like it might burst. I was almost to camp when I dared to look back. For a split second, I saw him, standing there at the edge of the trees, watching me. His face was still blank, his eyes dull, but his gaze felt heavy, like he was waiting for me to do something, to make some mistake. I didn't stop. I kept moving, finally reaching my tent. I zipped myself inside, gripping the lantern, listening for any sound outside. The night was dead silent, no wind, no rustling, just the sound of my own breathing. Hours passed, and eventually, the first light of dawn crept through the tent. I packed up my things as fast as I could, throwing everything into my bag, not caring if anything broke. I just needed to get out of there. As I walked back to my car, I glanced around, half expecting to see him lurking in the trees. But there was no sign of him. Just the quiet, empty forest. I've never been back to Yosemite since. I've tried to go camping in other places, but every time I set up my tent, I remember that figure standing just outside the light, watching, waiting. I don't know what he wanted, and I don't want to find out. I decided to take a solo hiking trip to the Grand Canyon. I'd always wanted to do it on my own, just me and the trail, nothing to bother me. I thought the quiet would be good for clearing my head, just walking at my own pace, feeling like I was the only person for miles. The day I chose was perfect, clear skies, a slight breeze, and only a few people around at the start. The narrow paths didn't bother me much, I was used to them. They cut along the cliffs, sharp turns, steep edges, and sometimes you could barely fit one person. If someone came from the other direction, you'd have to step back and let them by. A couple of hours in, I was deep enough that I stopped seeing anyone. Just me, the dry dirt under my boots, and the endless stretch of cliffs and the canyon below. I was moving along a narrow path, barely wide enough for one person, with a cliff drop on one side and a steep rock wall on the other. That's when I first noticed him. I was at a turn in the path when I saw him a ways behind me, another hiker, just standing still. It's common enough to see others on these trails, but this guy gave me a strange feeling right off. He was standing too still, and even from a distance, I could see him staring. The path was too narrow for him to have passed without me noticing, so he must have come from the same direction as me, but I didn't remember hearing or seeing him. I brushed it off, figuring he'd keep his distance or maybe stop for a break, and kept walking. But then, maybe 5 minutes later, I heard footsteps behind me. They were steady, a bit too close. I picked up my pace, hoping he'd get the hint, but the steps just matched mine. When I slowed, he slowed too. I could feel his eyes on my back. I finally turned around, and there he was, only a few feet away, staring. He was a man in his 30s, plain looking, with dark hair and a worn-out hiking jacket, but it was his eyes that got me. There was something unsettling about the way he looked at me, too intense, like he was sizing me up. I expected him to say something, maybe ask for directions or make small talk, but he just stared. It felt like he was waiting for me to do something. I mumbled a quick hey, nodding slightly, hoping it would break the weirdness, but he didn't respond. Just looked at me, eyes locked on like he didn't even hear me. I turned and kept walking, faster this time, telling myself he'd back off or maybe take a break. The footsteps kept following, steady and close, like he wasn't trying to keep his distance anymore. Every few minutes, I'd glance back, and he'd be there, always the same distance behind, eyes fixed on me, unblinking. The path was so narrow I couldn't just step aside, and there was no room for him to pass without brushing against me. But he never tried to pass, never made a move to overtake me, just followed, his footsteps syncing with mine. After about 20 minutes of this, I was starting to panic. There was no one else around, and I had no signal. The canyon was so quiet that every sound seemed louder, and his footsteps were the only thing I could hear besides my own. I thought about just stopping and confronting him, but something about the way he stared made me nervous. I didn't want to turn my back on him for too long. At one point, I slowed down so much that he had to stop too, and I turned around again. This time, he was close, maybe 3 feet away, staring straight at me with those same cold eyes. I could feel my heart pounding. I tried to keep my voice steady and said, "Are you trying to pass?" He didn't answer. Just kept looking at me like he was studying every move I made. It felt like he was waiting for something specific, and it made my skin crawl. After a moment, he took a single step forward, close enough now that I could see the dirt caked under his fingernails, the frayed edges of his jacket. That was it for me. I turned and started walking as fast as I could without running, hoping to put some distance between us. The path twisted and turned, and I hoped one of the bends would give me enough cover to lose him, but he kept up, his footsteps right behind me, always at the same distance, never closer, but never farther away. I could feel my breath getting shaky. The narrowness of the path felt suffocating. The cliff edge was only a few steps to my left, and the sheer drop was a constant reminder that I couldn't afford any wrong moves. At one point, I thought I could hear him breathing, slow and steady, matching my own. When the trail finally opened up a bit, I stopped again, thinking he'd have to pass me now. But instead, he stopped too, just far enough back to stay in the shadows, barely visible. He didn't say a word. Didn't even look like he was breathing heavy, just staring. I was on edge, my hands shaking. I didn't want to keep going with him behind me, so I tried something desperate. I pretended to take a break, setting down my backpack, and waited to see what he'd do. He just stood there, watching. When I didn't move, he didn't either. It felt like he was testing my patience, seeing how long I'd sit there before getting back up. After what felt like forever, I couldn't take it anymore. I grabbed my bag and started moving again, faster than before, almost at a jog. I didn't care about the path or the view anymore. I just wanted to get to a spot with people around or any place that didn't feel so isolated. Finally, I saw a wider area up ahead, where the path opened up near a small ledge overlooking the canyon. I figured it was my best chance, somewhere I could keep my distance from him, maybe get a good enough view to see if anyone else was nearby. I sped up, practically sprinting, and reached the ledge, dropping my bag again to catch my breath. For a moment, it was quiet. I couldn't hear his footsteps. I dared to hope he finally stopped, maybe given up or gone another way. Then I looked back. He was still there, just at the edge of the narrow path, watching me, his face still blank, like he had no expression, no reaction to anything. He stepped forward, stopping just before the ledge, looking down at the canyon, then back at me. I don't know what possessed me, but I finally yelled, "What do you want?" He didn't say a thing. Just stared, eyes never moving off me. The silence stretched on, his gaze drilling into me, making my skin crawl. I felt trapped, nowhere to go but back down the same narrow path with him behind me. At last, after what felt like forever, he turned. He walked back down the trail, disappearing around the first bend, just like that. I didn't move for a while, just stood there, waiting, expecting him to come back around the corner any second, but he never did. Eventually, I made my way back down, my eyes darting around every turn, my heart pounding until I finally reached the busier trailheads. I've never gone back to the Grand Canyon since. The worst part is, I'll never know what he wanted, but I can still feel his eyes on me, watching, just out of reach. I decided to go on a solo backpacking trip through Rocky Mountain National Park. I'd been out there a few times before, but always with friends, never alone. This time, I figured I'd try it on my own, get away from everything, really disconnect. The idea of being out there with no one around sounded perfect, just me in the mountains. The first day went great. I hiked most of the day, found a decent spot to set up camp near a stream, and spent the evening cooking a little meal, listening to the quiet. It was peaceful, exactly what I wanted. The stars were bright, the air was cold and fresh, and I felt like I was miles away from anyone, from anything. I was in bed early, and it didn't take long to fall asleep. The next morning, I packed up and decided to leave most of my gear at camp so I could explore a bit without hauling everything around. I didn't think twice about it. There was no one else around, and the area was remote. I thought about leaving a note, maybe in case I got turned around, but it felt unnecessary, so I didn't bother. I spent most of the day hiking further up the mountain, taking photos, and trying to spot some wildlife. It was late afternoon by the time I turned back. When I got to camp, the first thing I noticed was that something seemed off with my tent. It looked fine at a glance, but the zipper wasn't exactly where I'd left it. It was closed up, but in a way that felt different. Like someone had been inside and tried to close it up to make it look like nothing happened. I felt this chill, that prickling feeling at the back of my neck, but I brushed it off. I figured maybe it was just wind or something. The mountains get windy, things shift. Still, I felt strange as I walked up, keeping my eyes open, like I was expecting to see someone pop out from behind the trees. But there was no one, just me, and my tent looking wrong. When I opened it, my gear was all there, my sleeping bag, clothes, and my food stash untouched. That's when I saw the note, folded up right there on top of my bag. Just a plain scrap of paper, nothing fancy about it, but the words on it made my stomach drop. "You're being watched." That was all it said. No signature, no explanation, just those 3 words, written in plain, heavy letters, like someone had pressed down hard with whatever pen or pencil they used. My first thought was maybe someone was messing with me, like some hiker who saw me leave, but that didn't make sense. The place was too remote, and I hadn't seen another person since I left my car. I went outside, scanned the trees, the trail, any place where someone could be hiding, but it was dead quiet. Just the wind through the trees and the distant rush of the stream. I tried to stay calm, telling myself it had to be a joke. Maybe someone passing through saw my stuff, decided to leave a weird note to mess with me. But it didn't feel like that. It felt personal, like they wanted me to be afraid. The sun was starting to go down, and I thought about packing up and heading back to the trailhead, but it was too late to make it out by dark. So I did the next best thing. I packed up everything I'd left out, zipped the tent tight, and built a fire just a little bigger than usual. I figured it'd help me stay awake, keep me alert. The night was long. Every crack of a branch or rustle of a bush had me on edge. I kept staring out into the dark, half expecting to see someone standing there. I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. At some point, I thought I saw something, a shadow just outside the ring of firelight. I stood up, holding my flashlight, but when I shined it out, there was nothing. Just empty trees, swaying slightly in the night breeze. I told myself I was imagining things, that it was just the fear getting to me. But the feeling never left. When morning finally came, I was exhausted. I hadn't slept, barely eaten, but I wanted to get out of there. I started packing up as soon as there was enough light, and that's when I saw it, another note, this time right by the fire pit. I hadn't seen it the night before, and I know I would have noticed it if it had been there. The paper was just sitting there, plain as day, and I didn't even want to pick it up. But I forced myself to. This one was different. It said, "Leaving won't help. I see you." I can't explain the feeling I got reading that. My stomach twisted, and my skin went cold. I looked around, but again, nothing. No movement, no sound. Just me, alone in the woods with a note that made it clear someone was out there, watching. I didn't waste any more time. I packed up as fast as I could, barely checking my gear. My heart was pounding, and I could feel my hands shaking, but I just had to get out of there. Every step felt like it was taking too long, like I was moving in slow motion, but I didn't stop until I was back on the main trail, headed toward my car. I kept looking over my shoulder, half expecting to see someone trailing me, but there was never anyone there. I didn't feel safe until I was finally in my car, with the doors locked, leaving that place behind. I don't know who left those notes or why, but the feeling they gave me, like I was being hunted, it's something I can't forget. I haven't been back to that park since. I don't think I ever will. I decided to hike Zion National Park on my own. It wasn't my first solo trip, and Zion felt like a place I could handle, with all the trails and the people coming and going. I planned out my route for 3 days, packed everything carefully, and set out early in the morning. The first day went smoothly. The trail was busy, and I kept my pace, knowing exactly where I wanted to set up camp. By the end of the first day, the crowd started thinning. People were heading back to the main entrance, and I kept going until I was alone. I found a nice spot to camp, got my tent set up, and had a quiet meal. The night was clear, and it felt perfect out there, just me and the stars, no noise except the faint sounds of nature around me. The next morning, I packed up and kept going, wanting to get deeper into the park, away from everything and everyone. The trail was empty. It was just past midday, and I was coming around a curve in the trail when I saw someone standing up ahead, blocking the path. He was an older guy, maybe in his late 50s, with a scruffy beard and a dark jacket that looked a little too heavy for the weather. He just stood there, looking down at the trail, and didn't even notice me at first. I thought about turning around or maybe just waiting until he moved on, but then he looked up and saw me. He gave a small wave, like he'd been expecting me, and started walking over. "Hey there," he said, like he was just meeting an old friend. "You hiking alone?" I nodded, but I felt uneasy. He had this odd look in his eyes, something I couldn't quite place. He kept his smile, but it didn't reach his eyes. He held out his hand and introduced himself, but I barely caught his name. He just kept talking, saying how he was also hiking alone and thought it might be nice if we walked together, safety in numbers and all that. Something about him felt off, but I didn't want to seem rude. I told myself maybe he was just lonely. Maybe he'd been out here a while and was glad to see another person. He didn't look dangerous, just a little strange. We walked for a while, and he kept the conversation going. Mostly he talked about himself. He told me he'd been a trucker, that he'd driven all over the country, and that he'd seen a lot of things. He said it like he wanted me to ask him what he meant, but I didn't. After a while, he started saying things that got under my skin. He talked about his family, his kids, and how they'd all moved away. He said they didn't speak to him anymore, that they didn't understand him. "People just don't get me," he muttered, glancing over at me with a strange look. "You ever feel like that?" I didn't know what to say, so I just nodded, hoping he'd drop it. But he kept going, telling me how people had the wrong idea about him, that people never bothered to listen. He seemed frustrated, and it was like he was waiting for me to say something specific. When I didn't, he just laughed to himself, like he was disappointed. After that, he got quiet for a bit, and I felt this sense of relief, like maybe he finally stopped talking. But then he turned to me again and asked if I believed in second chances. "I think everyone deserves one," he said. His voice was low, and he looked straight at me as he said it. There was something unsettling in the way he held my gaze, like he was trying to read me, trying to figure out what I thought of him. I nodded again, hoping to keep things neutral. He didn't seem satisfied with that answer. He kept talking, but now his voice was softer, like he didn't want anyone else to hear. He told me he'd made some mistakes in his life, and then he paused, waiting for a reaction. I tried to keep my expression calm, tried not to let him see how nervous I was. "Do you know what it's like to have to start over?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. He looked away, staring down the trail ahead of us, and muttered something about getting a fresh start out here. Then he said something that made my blood run cold. He looked back at me, eyes narrowed, and said, "You know, nobody really knows I'm out here." I didn't tell anyone. His tone was casual, but the words felt heavy, like he was testing me. I tried to laugh it off, told him that was what solo hiking was all about, the freedom, the escape. But he didn't laugh. He just kept watching me, his eyes dark and unblinking. After a few minutes, he said he was tired and suggested we take a break. I wanted to keep moving, but I didn't know how to say no without making things tense. So I agreed, and we sat down near a boulder by the side of the trail. As we sat, he kept talking, his voice low and almost mumbling, like he was talking to himself more than to me. He started saying things that barely made sense, about his past, his mistakes, things he'd done that he couldn't take back. He didn't give details, but he said it like he wanted me to imagine the worst. My nerves were fraying. I kept glancing down the trail, calculating how far I'd have to go to get away from him. Then, out of nowhere, he put a hand on my arm. His grip was strong, too strong, and he leaned close, looking me dead in the eyes. "Do you ever feel like people don't see the real you?" he whispered, his voice shaking. "Like you're wearing a mask, hiding all the things you really want to do?" I pulled my arm away, tried to stay calm, and said something about needing to keep moving before it got too late. But he just sat there, staring at me, not moving. His eyes had this strange intensity, something that felt almost desperate. I stood up, pretending I didn't notice how close he was watching me. "I think I'm going to keep going," I said, trying to sound casual. He stood up slowly, dusting off his pants, and for a moment, I thought he was going to grab me, or try to stop me. But he didn't. He just gave me a long, hard look, his mouth set in a tight line, and then he nodded. "All right," he said, his voice flat. "Guess I'll see you around, then." I didn't waste a second. I walked as quickly as I could without breaking into a run, glancing back every few minutes to see if he was following me. He stayed where I left him, standing on the trail, just watching me go. I didn't stop, didn't look back again until I was sure I'd put some distance between us. The rest of the hike, I was on edge, jumping at every sound, every rustle in the trees. I kept expecting to see him around every corner, kept picturing him stepping out from behind a tree, that strange look on his face. When I finally got back to my car, I was exhausted, both mentally and physically. I got in, locked the doors, and sat there for a moment, just breathing. I don't know who that man was, or what he'd done, but the way he spoke, the things he said, it felt like he was hiding something, like he was out there to escape something, or someone. And I felt, in that moment, like I was lucky to have gotten away. I'd planned this trip to Yellowstone for months. I was going alone, just me, my tent, and the open air for a couple of nights. I liked it that way, the peace and quiet, and I'd never had any issues camping solo before. This time, I'd set up my tent a little deeper in the forest, far enough from the main campsite so I could have a true wilderness experience. No noise, no people around. Or so I thought. The first day went perfectly. I hiked a good bit, took some photos, had a light dinner, and turned in early. The forest around me was quiet, and it felt like the kind of calm I was looking for, just trees and sky and open space. I zipped up my tent and fell asleep right away. But when I woke up, things felt wrong almost immediately. The first thing I noticed was that my tent was zipped halfway open. I always closed it completely to keep out bugs or small animals, but it was sitting there wide open, like someone had just been standing there, watching. I looked around, groggy, half convinced I was still dreaming. The tent flaps swayed slightly, but the forest was silent, still. I crawled out and immediately noticed more odd things. My stuff, it wasn't where I'd left it. My backpack was carefully propped against a tree, about 3 feet away from where I'd set it down the night before. My sleeping bag was rolled up and placed neatly on a stump, almost like someone was tidying up after me. Even my boots were side by side, laces perfectly aligned, set on a rock nearby. At first, I thought I must have done it myself. Maybe I'd gotten up in the night, half asleep, and moved things around without realizing. But that didn't sit right. I'd never done anything like that before. I'm a heavy sleeper, and once I'm out until morning. And even if I had gotten up, this was too organized, too deliberate. I felt uneasy, but I tried to shake it off. Maybe some park staff came by for safety reasons, even though I hadn't seen anyone else since I'd arrived. Still, it felt off, like I was missing something important. I went about my morning, tried to ignore the uneasiness that was creeping in. I made coffee, packed up a light lunch, and set off for a trail I'd planned to hike. As I walked, I kept looking over my shoulder. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching me. I thought I'd hear footsteps behind me or catch a glimpse of someone darting behind a tree, but every time I looked, the forest was empty. After a couple of hours, I decided to head back to camp. The whole hike, I'd been fighting this crawling feeling, like eyes were on me, just out of view. When I got back, my campsite looked different again. This time, I knew I hadn't moved anything. But now my stuff was rearranged again. My food bag was open, but nothing was missing. Everything was laid out in neat little rows, like someone had been inspecting it. Even my water bottle was unscrewed, left half open beside my sleeping bag. My flashlight, which I'd left in my tent, was now outside, balanced perfectly on top of my rolled-up jacket. I looked around, heart racing. There were no footprints, no signs of animals. Everything was perfectly still, as if whoever or whatever had done this was still nearby, watching. The thought made my skin crawl, and I scanned the trees, looking for anything unusual. And that's when I saw him. About 50 feet away, just past a cluster of pines, there was a man, He was standing perfectly still, just watching me. He didn't move or wave, just stood there, his face half hidden in the shadows of the trees. I couldn't make out any details, but I could see that he was smiling. Not in a friendly way, but more appreciative, like he was proud of what he'd done. I shouted, "Hello? Can I help you?" My voice came out shaky, not as confident as I wanted it to sound. But he didn't respond. He just kept standing there, that strange, fixed smile on his face, nodding slowly. I took a step toward him, and that's when he finally moved. He turned, almost casually, and walked away, disappearing into the trees. I felt a shiver run through me, and I stood there for a while, just listening, trying to hear his footsteps. But there was nothing. He was gone, like he'd never been there at all. But that nod, that smile, it left a bad feeling in the pit of my stomach. I tried to brush it off, told myself he was just some strange hiker passing through. Maybe he hadn't meant to scare me, maybe he was just curious. But I couldn't shake the feeling that he'd been watching me for a lot longer than I'd realized. That night, I didn't sleep well. I kept the flashlight on and listened for any sound, any rustle or snap of a twig. I half decided to leave first thing in the morning, to just cut my trip short and get out of there. But the next day, things were quiet. No sign of a man, no more rearranged items. I started to think maybe I'd imagined it, maybe it was all just some kind of weird fluke. But that night, I woke up again to find my tent open, wider this time, the cool night air slipping inside. I scrambled to sit up, and the first thing I saw was a new arrangement of my stuff, laid out in even lines. My jacket, my food bag, my flashlight. Everything lined up, neat and careful, like someone was making sure I'd notice. And just outside my tent, barely visible in the faint light, was another note. It was a scrap of paper, a piece torn from what looked like an old map. And written on it, in careful block letters, was a single word. Tomorrow. I froze, staring at the note, my heart pounding. There was no question now. Someone was out there, someone who'd been watching me this whole time, waiting for something. That note felt like a warning, or a promise. Either way, it was enough for me. I didn't waste any time. I threw everything into my bag, barely stopping to make sure I had everything. I didn't even take down the tent, I just grabbed my essentials and left. I didn't care if I had to walk all night. I just needed to get away from that place, to put as much distance between myself and that man as possible. As I walked, every sound felt amplified, every rustle in the trees sending a jolt of fear through me. I kept looking back, half expecting to see him following, but the trail was empty. Still, I felt him out there, watching, that approving smile seared into my mind. It took me most of the night, but I finally made it back to a busier part of the park, close to the ranger station. I waited there until morning, not caring about the curious looks from the few other hikers who passed by. When I finally got back to my car, I felt like I could breathe again. I drove out of there as fast as I could, glancing in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see that man's face staring back at me. I don't know what he wanted, or why he did any of it. I went out to Glacier National Park by myself, something I'd done a few times before without any issues. It was usually peaceful, just me and the quiet. I picked a secluded spot to set up my tent, not too far from the river. There weren't a lot of other people around, which was fine by me. I liked the solitude, no distractions, just me and the trail. I set everything up, got the fire going, and started to settle in. That evening, I was cooking up some food when I realized a few things were missing from my bag. At first, I thought I'd just misplaced them, small stuff, like my spare socks and one of my canteens. I looked around, checked pockets, my tent, the ground. But they weren't anywhere. I convinced myself I'd probably just left them at home or packed them somewhere strange, even though I knew I wouldn't normally do that. I went on with the night, trying to enjoy the sounds of the river and the trees, but it felt different. It was like the woods were too quiet. I'd hear a snap or a shuffle in the bushes, but every time I turned, there was nothing. I started thinking about bears or other animals, so I took extra care to secure my food away from my tent before turning in. I didn't want to run into any animals in the middle of the night. Around dusk, a man wandered over from a few campsites down. He was tall, with scruffy hair, looked a little rough around the edges. He walked up with this friendly smile, said he'd noticed I was camping alone and wanted to make sure I was all right. I was polite, said I was fine and had everything I needed. But he lingered a bit, his eyes drifting around my campsite, looking at my things. I could feel him eyeing my gear like he was studying it, taking it all in. After a bit, he mentioned that he'd seen me unpacking earlier. He commented on specific things I had, my blue sleeping bag, my red backpack, even my old metal flashlight that I kept next to my tent. I remember thinking it was strange that he'd noticed all these details, things he shouldn't have known unless he'd been watching me for a while. I brushed it off, thinking maybe he was just observant, but it unsettled me. He asked me if I'd seen anything strange around my campsite. I shrugged, trying to keep my guard up, not letting on that I was already on edge. He mentioned hearing noises around his own campsite, like someone moving through his things. Then he glanced at me, almost like he was checking to see if I was buying his story. I forced a smile and nodded, not really wanting to engage with him any longer than I had to. As he walked away, he turned back once and said, "You're careful with your stuff, right? Sometimes people around here aren't too friendly." Then he gave this odd grin, like he found something amusing. I didn't respond, I just watched him walk back to his site. I could feel my heart beating faster, but I told myself not to overthink it. When I went back to my tent, I did a quick inventory, just to make sure nothing else was missing. That's when I noticed something strange. My jacket was folded differently than I'd left it. And one of my maps was spread out on the ground, like someone had been looking at it. My stomach dropped. I'd been out of my camp for a while during the day, exploring the river, and the thought hit me that someone had been in my things while I was gone. The rest of the night, I kept my flashlight in my hand and barely got any sleep, listening to every little noise outside. I kept thinking about that guy from earlier, wondering if he'd been watching me the whole time. But nothing else happened that night, and by morning, I convinced myself it was just nerves. Maybe he was just another hiker, just a bit odd. The next day, I went for a hike, trying to shake off the uneasy feeling. I figured some exercise and fresh air would clear my head. When I got back to camp later in the afternoon, I noticed my gear looked disturbed again. My cooking pot was set out near the fire pit, even though I hadn't taken it out that morning. Some of my food wrappers were scattered near my tent, but nothing was eaten. It felt deliberate, almost like someone wanted me to notice. I felt a chill down my spine, and without thinking, I turned around, scanning the trees, trying to spot any movement, but there was nothing there. I was about to pack up and leave, but then I saw him again, the man from the campsite. He was standing just off the path, watching me. He waved casually, like we were just two friendly campers, but his eyes never left my stuff. He walked over, slower this time, as if he was giving me time to notice him. "I thought you'd be gone by now," he said, still smiling. "Most people don't stick around after a night like that." "What do you mean?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. He shrugged. "Oh, just thought you'd feel uncomfortable camping here alone. Things get weird, you know? Some people can't handle it." He gave me a long look, and I felt like he was testing me somehow, like he was waiting for me to say something. I tried to brush him off, said I'd be fine. But he didn't leave. He glanced at my tent, my gear, almost like he was taking an inventory again, and then he looked back at me. "You're sure everything's where it should be?" he asked, his eyes narrowing just a bit. "I could help you check if you're missing anything." I shook my head, my throat dry. "No, I've got it. Thanks." There was this silence that hung between us, uncomfortable and tense. Finally, he gave a little nod and turned to go, but before he walked away, he said, "Just be careful. There are all kinds of folks out here, you know?" I didn't move until he was out of sight. My mind was racing, every instinct telling me to leave, but I didn't want to give him the satisfaction of knowing he'd rattled me. I went about the rest of the day, my nerves on edge, double-checking every little thing I did. I was almost counting down the hours until morning, telling myself I'd pack up and leave as soon as the sun came up. That night, I stayed awake, keeping the flashlight pointed at my tent's entrance. I didn't hear anything unusual, but I felt like I wasn't alone. Every gust of wind, every creak from the trees had me jumpy. Just when I started to think maybe he'd left me alone, I heard a faint sound, like someone was rifling through the bushes right outside my tent. I held my breath, clutching the flashlight, waiting to hear footsteps or movement. But it was silent. Then I heard something else whispering. Not words I could make out, just a low, muffled voice, almost like it was directed at me but quiet enough to keep me guessing. I turned the flashlight off, hoping the dark would give me a better chance of spotting anything outside. I could see a shadow through the thin fabric of my tent. It shifted, just outside, not moving but hovering there, as if waiting. I held my breath, my heart pounding in my chest, feeling like it would give me away. The shadow lingered for a few more seconds, and then it was gone. I didn't sleep at all after that. The second the sun came up, I was packed. I threw everything into my bag, not caring about folding or organizing. I just wanted to be out of there. I took the trail that led back toward the main road, looking over my shoulder every few steps, half expecting to see him watching me from the trees. I reached the parking lot, threw my gear in my car, and drove out of there, not stopping until I was a good hour away from the park. I tried to calm down, tell myself that maybe it was just my imagination, but deep down, I knew it wasn't. I don't know who he was or what he wanted, but the way he looked at my stuff, the way he knew where everything was, it felt personal. Like he'd been watching me long before I'd even realized he was there. I haven't been back to Glacier since, and I don't think I ever will. I was hiking in Sequoia National Park on a solo trip, just a few days to get away from everything. I'd gone out there before, so I thought I knew the trails pretty well. The plan was to do a loop that would take me back to my campsite by sundown. Nothing out of the ordinary. I'd been walking for hours, taking in the sights, the quiet. It was just me, the trees, and the path. Around midday, I noticed another hiker coming up behind me. Middle-aged guy, a bit older than me, probably in his late 40s, thin and tall. He wore an old flannel shirt and cargo pants, and he had this wide-brimmed hat that shaded his face. He seemed friendly enough, and he called out, saying it was nice to see another person on the trail. I nodded back, not wanting to be rude, but I wasn't looking for company. We got to talking as we walked, though. He told me his name was Dan. Said he'd been out here for days and knew the place pretty well. He seemed experienced, and I thought he might have been coming here for years. He kept glancing at me as he spoke, his eyes sharp under the hat, like he was sizing me up. I told myself not to overthink it. After a while, he mentioned he knew a shortcut that could get me back to my camp faster. He said it would take me through a hidden path, one only a few people knew about. He looked me dead in the eye when he said it, and something about his tone felt strange. I should have trusted my gut then. But he looked confident, and I figured maybe he was one of those local hikers who knew all the back trails. We kept going, and I followed him off the main trail. At first, the shortcut looked well worn, with patches of dirt cleared from where other people had walked. But after a while, it became clear we were veering farther from anything that looked familiar. The trees grew closer together, and the sunlight barely broke through the branches. My instincts were telling me to turn back, but Dan kept saying, "It's just a little further." I tried making small talk, asking him about his hikes here, but his answers grew short, more focused on the trail than me. He had this unsettling smile, too, the kind that didn't quite reach his eyes. He just kept his pace, looking back every few minutes to make sure I was still following. After another hour or so, I didn't recognize anything. We were deep in, and I started to feel uneasy, but Dan didn't seem worried. I asked him if he was sure we were going in the right direction. He stopped, turned to face me, and just stared, as if he didn't understand the question. Then he gave this low chuckle and said, "I've been here plenty of times. Trust me." It was getting later than I'd planned, and I told him I should probably turn back. He just shrugged and said, "If that's what you want." But he didn't offer any advice on how to get back, just looked around at the trees, almost like he was waiting for me to ask him to keep guiding me. I felt this pressure, like he wanted me to give up and keep following him. Against my better judgment, I went with him a bit longer, hoping I'd see some familiar landmark. But as we walked, I felt more and more like we were going nowhere. It was as if the whole forest was closing in on us, no sign of the open paths I was used to. Dan kept glancing back with that strange look, watching my every move. Finally, I told him I was turning around. I felt trapped, and I wasn't going to go any further. When I said that, he stopped dead in his tracks. He didn't look at me right away, just kept staring at the ground like he was considering something. I felt a chill run down my spine, and I couldn't explain why. He finally looked up, his face blank, and said, "If you really think you know the way back alone." I didn't respond, just turned and started heading in the direction we came. My heart was pounding as I tried to remember the way, but everything looked different. I could hear Dan's footsteps behind me, slow and steady. He didn't say anything, just kept following me. I told him he didn't need to come with me, but he ignored that, just kept walking, matching my pace. I didn't know what to do, so I just kept moving, hoping I'd find my way out. The forest felt wrong. Every tree looked the same, and I couldn't see any familiar markers. I sped up, trying to put some distance between us, but Dan just walked faster, always a few steps behind. It felt like he was breathing down my neck. Then, out of nowhere, he spoke again, voice low. "You should have just stayed on the main trail." I didn't respond, just kept walking. My hands were shaking, and I could feel my throat tighten. I thought about running, but we were in the middle of nowhere, and I didn't know the terrain. If I tripped, I'd be helpless. Dan was close enough that I could almost feel his gaze on the back of my head. After what felt like hours, I spotted something familiar, a large rock formation I'd passed earlier. I took a deep breath, feeling some relief, and started toward it. But then Dan stepped in front of me, blocking my path. He just stared at me, silent, with this cold look in his eyes. "You really don't know your way, do you?" he said, and there was no warmth in his voice anymore, just this flat tone that made my stomach twist. I forced myself to look calm, told him I'd be fine on my own, but he didn't move. He just stood there, looking at me like he was studying me, deciding something. I took a step back, and his eyes narrowed. He didn't move, didn't say a word, but his whole posture was tense, like he was daring me to try and get past him. My heart was racing, and I could barely breathe, but I knew I couldn't let him see that. Finally, I turned and started walking away, heading in a different direction, even though I wasn't sure where it would lead. I heard his footsteps behind me again, steady, never too close but always there. It felt like he was toying with me, letting me think I could get away but never really leaving me alone. As the sky started to darken, I finally saw an opening through the trees. I walked faster, hoping it would lead to a main trail. Dan stayed back, just out of sight, but I could still feel him watching me. When I reached the clearing, I recognized the area and broke into a run, not looking back. I kept running until I reached the parking area near the ranger station. Only then did I stop and look back, but he was gone. No sign of him, no footsteps, nothing. It was like he'd vanished into the trees. I went straight to the ranger and reported what had happened, but there wasn't much they could do with so little information. They said they'd keep an eye out, but I could tell they didn't think it was serious. I drove out of the park that night, not stopping until I was miles away. I haven't been back to Sequoia since, and I don't think I ever will. The way he looked at me, the way he followed me, it was like he'd done it before. Like he'd been waiting for someone like me to come along, someone who'd trust a stranger in the woods. I was camping alone in the Great Smoky Mountains, just looking to clear my head. I'd never done a solo trip before, but I'd been out there a couple of times with friends, and I felt like I knew what I was doing. I set up my tent in a small clearing, a little ways off one of the marked trails. I thought the spot was perfect. Not another soul around, just trees, open sky, and quiet. That first day was fine. I did a bit of hiking, took pictures, and gathered firewood. The forest was beautiful but thick. The trees were close, and sometimes it felt like they were watching me. Still, I told myself it was just my imagination and brushed it off. I went to bed early that night, right around sundown. I'd been hiking all day and felt completely worn out. I settled into my sleeping bag, turned off my lantern, and tried to fall asleep. But every time I got close, I'd hear something. Leaves crunching, sticks snapping, the low hum of something I couldn't quite place. It was probably just the usual sounds of the woods, but it felt different. Then I heard it. Clear as day. A voice whispered my name. I froze, barely breathing, straining to listen. There was a silence, deep and heavy, and then again, a whisper, Sophie. It was soft, like whoever it was didn't want to wake me up, but close. Way too close. It wasn't like it was coming from far off in the woods. It sounded like it was right outside my tent. I lay there, heart pounding so loud I swore whoever was out there could hear it. I didn't want to move, didn't want to make a sound. My brain went wild, trying to figure out who it could be. I hadn't seen anyone all day. There shouldn't have been anyone around for miles. Then, the whisper came again, slow and drawn out, Sophie. I tried to convince myself it was the wind or maybe an animal making a noise that just sounded like my name. But the voice was so clear. And it wasn't frantic or angry. It was calm, too calm, like whoever was saying it had all the time in the world. I reached for my phone, just to see what time it was. Barely past midnight. I kept my hand on it, holding onto it like it could protect me. I thought about turning on my flashlight, but the idea of whatever was out there seeing me, knowing I was awake, it just felt like the wrong move. I didn't sleep that night. I lay there, tense, straining to hear anything else, but it was quiet after that. Just that one whisper, over and over in my head, until morning came. When the sun finally rose, I unzipped my tent and stepped out, feeling that shaky relief you get when a nightmare ends. But when I looked around, that relief was gone in an instant. There were footprints. They weren't animal prints either. They were the unmistakable shape of boots, pressed deep into the dirt, circling my tent. They went around and around, in a tight loop, like someone had been pacing right outside, right around me, while I was inside. I felt this cold wave of dread wash over me, like I was still in a nightmare. The tracks didn't lead anywhere. They didn't start or end in any direction. Just circled the tent, as if someone had been walking in a loop all night, waiting. I spent a few minutes just staring at them, trying to understand. I looked around, but there wasn't a trace of anyone else. No other campsites, no sign of a trail where they might have come from. I was alone. Or I should have been. I packed up right away, shoving everything into my backpack as fast as I could. I wasn't sticking around to see if they'd come back. I tried to stay calm as I walked back toward the main trail, but every sound made me jump. A bird would take off from a branch, and I'd spin around, expecting to see someone behind me. As I walked, I kept an eye on the ground, looking for more footprints. But there was nothing, no sign of anyone having been on that path recently. It was like those prints outside my tent had appeared from nowhere and vanished the same way. Finally, I reached the parking lot. I threw my stuff in my car, locked the doors, and didn't look back. The whole way home, I kept checking my mirrors, expecting to see someone following me, some shadow on the road that wasn't supposed to be there. But it was just me, alone, trying to shake the feeling that whoever had whispered my name wasn't done with me yet. I've gone camping a few times since, but always with friends, and never, ever alone. I don't think I could handle another night like that, lying in the dark, listening to my own name being whispered by someone I couldn't see. I'd been planning that hike in Olympic National Park for months. I wanted somewhere quiet, somewhere out of the way. Just me, a long trail, and maybe a couple of nights alone with my thoughts. I'd done solo hikes before, but nothing this secluded, and that's why I picked it. No people, no crowds, just miles of forest. I started early in the morning, parked the car at the trailhead, double-checked my backpack, and set out. The trees were thick and tall, stretching overhead and casting shadows, even in the early light. The trail was winding, narrow, cutting through the thick underbrush. It was a little damp, too. Mist was hanging between the trees, so it felt like stepping into some other world. A few hours in, I stopped for a break. I'd barely seen any other footprints on the trail, which suited me just fine. Just trees and the smell of pine and moss, thick in the air. I sat down, drank some water, and listened to the wind in the branches, the occasional bird call. It was peaceful. I didn't want to leave, but after a few minutes, I got up and kept moving. That's when I noticed it. I heard the snap of a twig, far off, but close enough to be something solid. At first, I thought it might be a deer or some other animal, but I couldn't shake this odd feeling. I kept glancing back over my shoulder, telling myself it was nothing. Just the sound of the forest, right? But something about it felt wrong. I kept going, trying to ignore it. After another hour, the feeling got stronger. Every so often, I hear a crunch of leaves or the creak of a branch from somewhere behind me, just out of sight. I'd turn, and there'd be nothing. Maybe it was an animal, I told myself. Something was definitely back there. But there was no quick rustling of a rabbit, no big shuffle like a bear. It was careful. Almost too careful. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. I stopped and turned around, staring down the path, waiting for any movement. I squinted into the distance, through the trees, trying to pick out any sign of something unusual. And that's when I saw him. He was standing a good distance away, leaning casually against a tree. He was wearing a dark jacket, a hat that shadowed his face. His arms were crossed, and he wasn't moving. Just watching. I felt this chill go through me, like the forest suddenly got colder. He didn't wave, didn't call out, nothing. He just stood there, too far away to make out any features, but close enough that I knew he was looking right at me. I tried to act calm, tried to ignore the weird feeling in my gut. Maybe he was another hiker. I hadn't seen any other cars at the trailhead, but it was possible someone else had come in later. I gave him a nod, kind of half-hearted, and turned back, picked up my pace. After a while, I glanced back again, just to see. He was closer. Not right behind me, but closer than before, walking slow, hands in his pockets. I felt my stomach drop. He was following me. There was no mistaking it now. I sped up, putting more distance between us, but every time I looked back, he'd be there, the same calm, steady walk, like he had all the time in the world. I told myself I'd just keep moving, that he'd lose interest eventually. But he didn't. I walked faster, almost a jog now, and he kept pace, that same slow, unhurried walk. I kept going, glancing back every few minutes. He was always there, like he knew exactly how fast to go so he wouldn't lose me. I couldn't take it anymore. I stopped and spun around, trying to sound firm, trying not to let my voice shake. "Hey!" I called out. "Can I help you with something?" He stopped too, standing still, and tilted his head, like he was thinking about it. Then he smiled. Not a big grin, not friendly, just a small, unsettling smile that didn't reach his eyes. He looked at me and said, "I was wondering when you'd notice." The way he said it, like he'd been waiting for me, like this whole thing had been some game to him, it made my blood run cold. He didn't move, just kept that smile, like he knew something I didn't. I forced myself to stay calm, told myself not to show any fear, but it was hard. My mind was racing, and all I could think was that I needed to get out of there. I turned around, picked up my pace again, almost breaking into a run. I didn't care about the trail or my gear or anything. I just needed to put distance between us. I thought about going off the trail, but the woods were thick, and I didn't want to risk getting lost. The only way out was forward. I kept glancing back, hoping he'd be gone, but every time, he was closer. That slow walk, always the same pace, but somehow, he kept getting nearer. I tried to keep calm, tried to tell myself he was just another hiker, maybe playing some weird joke. But I knew that wasn't it. He wasn't laughing, wasn't saying anything else. Just that same steady smile, like he was enjoying every second of this. Finally, I could see a break in the trees, the parking lot up ahead. Relief washed over me. I picked up speed, practically running now. I didn't dare look back. I just kept going, focusing on the lot, on my car, on getting out of there. When I reached the lot, I didn't waste any time. I fumbled with my keys, heart racing, throwing my stuff in the back, locking the doors as fast as I could. I looked up, scanning the trailhead, expecting to see him coming out of the trees. But he didn't. The trail was empty, just the quiet of the woods, the sun starting to set, casting long shadows. I sat there, breathing hard, waiting, half expecting him to come strolling out at any second. But he never did. I don't know how long I waited there, staring at the trailhead, expecting to see that same smile, that look in his eyes that said he'd already won. But after a while, the tension faded, and I pulled out of the lot, hands shaking on the wheel the whole way down. I haven't gone back to Olympic since. It was a Saturday morning in late September when I decided to hike in Acadia National Park. I had been feeling overwhelmed lately, and the thought of fresh air and the beauty of nature was just what I needed. I packed my backpack with water, some snacks, and my camera. I arrived at the park early, hoping to beat the crowds. The weather was perfect, crisp but not too cold, with a clear blue sky above. The trail I chose was a lesser-known one, winding through dense woods and offering stunning views of the coast. I loved the quiet, the sound of leaves crunching underfoot, and the distant calls of birds. As I walked, I took pictures of the trees and the occasional glimpse of the ocean through the branches. I felt light and free, the weight of my worries lifting with every step. After an hour or so, I rounded a bend and came to a clearing. The sunlight poured in, illuminating the path ahead. I stopped for a moment to catch my breath and take in the view when I noticed a figure in the distance. A man was standing a little off the trail, just inside the tree line. He was looking directly at me. I squinted, trying to see him better. He seemed to be in his late 40s, dressed in hiking gear, but something about him made me uneasy. I considered turning back, but I didn't want to seem rude. I lifted my hand in a tentative wave, but he didn't wave back. Instead, he stepped forward, out of the trees, and onto the trail. "I've been waiting for you," he said, his voice steady and calm. I felt a chill run through me. "What do you mean?" I asked, trying to keep my tone light. He took a step closer. "I know you. I've been waiting for you to come here." I forced a smile, thinking he must be joking. "I'm sorry, but I don't think we've met." His expression didn't change. "No, not like that. I know you. I know things about you." I took a step back, feeling the weight of his gaze on me. "Listen, I really need to keep hiking," I said, trying to brush him off. I turned to move past him, but he stepped in front of me, blocking my way. "Wait," he said, his voice more urgent now. "You don't understand. You're not safe out here." "What do you mean?" My heart raced. The woods felt suddenly too quiet, and I could hear my pulse in my ears. "I know you're alone." "You shouldn't be alone," he insisted. "I can help you. You need to trust me." "I don't even know you," I said, my voice shaking a little. "I just want to hike in peace." He took another step closer, and I felt a wave of fear wash over me. "You have to listen. I know things about your life. Things you haven't told anyone." I stared at him, searching for some hint of honesty in his face. "How do you know anything about me?" He smiled then, but it didn't reach his eyes. "I just do. I've been watching you. You need to listen to me. I can protect you." The weight of his words settled around me like a fog. My instinct screamed at me to get away. I took another step back. "I'm sorry, but I really have to go." He moved again, stepping into my path, blocking my way. "I won't let you leave. You don't understand. There are things out here. People who will hurt you. I can help you. Just let me show you." My heart raced. I felt trapped. The forest around us was still, and I could sense the danger radiating off him. "You're scaring me," I said, trying to sound firm, but I could hear the tremor in my voice. "Don't be scared," he said, his voice suddenly softening. "I'm here to help. I've been waiting for you to notice me. You need to trust me. I know you are going through things, and I can help." The way he spoke sent shivers down my spine. I felt like a deer caught in headlights. My mind raced through my options. I could try to push past him, but he was taller and more solid than I was. I could scream, but who would hear me? "I really have to go now," I said, my voice firmer. I glanced to my right, looking for an opening, any way to escape. I took a deep breath, trying to keep my panic at bay. "You are not listening," he said, raising his voice. "I'm telling you that I can help you. You don't have to do this alone." Before I could think, I ducked to the left and ran. I didn't look back. I could hear him call out after me, but I kept moving, pushing myself to go faster. The trail narrowed, and branches scratched at my arms as I ran, but I didn't care. I had to get away. My heart pounded in my chest, my breath coming in quick bursts. I could still hear him behind me, but I didn't dare look back. I focused on the trail ahead, willing myself to keep going. I could see the trees thinning in the distance. The sound of his footsteps faded slightly, but I could not let my guard down. I stumbled but caught myself. I was close to the clearing where I had first seen him. I thought of all the people who might be around, the cars in the parking lot, the park rangers. I needed to reach them. As I burst into the clearing, I didn't stop. I kept running until I reached the edge of the trail, where it met the parking area. My heart was racing, and I could see my car in the distance, just a little farther now. I finally reached my car, fumbled with the keys, and jumped inside. I locked the doors and took a moment to collect myself, glancing around for any sign of him. After a moment, I spotted him standing at the edge of the woods, just beyond the clearing. He was watching me, a shadow among the trees. I could see that unsettling smile on his face again. I felt the panic rise in my chest, but I quickly started the engine and pulled out of the lot, not looking back. I drove away as fast as I could, adrenaline surging through me. I felt shaky and relieved all at once. I had escaped. I had gotten away. I never returned to that trail. The memory of his words haunted me for weeks, but I learned to be more careful. I realized that sometimes the most innocent places can hold the most danger. I decided to spend the day at Joshua Tree, hiking one of the desert trails on my own. I'd been to the park before, but this time I wanted to go off the beaten path a bit, away from all the tourists. I set off early in the morning, and by the time I got there, the sun was already climbing high. It was quiet, not too many people around, which was exactly what I wanted. As I parked and grabbed my stuff out of the car, I noticed an old white van sitting a little ways down the road. It didn't stand out at first, just looked like one of those vans you see with rock climbers or travelers, especially out here. But as I started walking toward the trail, I glanced over and saw someone sitting in the driver's seat, just staring straight ahead. Something about the way he sat there, not moving at all, kind of threw me off. He was close enough that he would have seen me looking over, but he didn't react. He just kept staring. I shook it off, figuring maybe he was just taking a break or maybe he'd spent the night out there and was still groggy. I got onto the trail and focused on my hike, letting the desert landscape pull me in. The place had a strange beauty to it, with the twisted trees and huge boulders everywhere. I lost track of time pretty quickly, just wandering and taking it all in. About an hour in, I stopped to rest and grab some water. As I sat down on a rock, I noticed something in the distance. There was a glint of metal, just beyond a hill a little further down the trail. I squinted, and my stomach twisted a bit when I realized it was the same van. It was parked off the dirt road near another part of the trail. The guy had parked it pretty far from the main road, but there it was, just sitting there again. I told myself it was probably just a coincidence. Maybe he was out here for the same reason I was, just exploring. But as I kept walking, I couldn't shake the weird feeling that he'd moved his van intentionally to stay close by. I tried not to let it bother me, but every now and then, I'd catch myself glancing over my shoulder. I kept on for a while, stopping here and there to look around. The whole time, though, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I tried to brush it off, but every time I thought about that van, I felt a chill run down my spine. Eventually, I started making my way back. I hadn't seen anyone else the entire hike, and the stillness was starting to feel suffocating. Just when I thought maybe I was overreacting, I saw him again. The van was parked just off the trail where I'd come in. This time, he was outside, leaning against the driver's door. He had one hand in his pocket and looked like he was waiting for something, or someone. His eyes were hidden under a cap, but I could feel his gaze on me. I thought about turning around, maybe taking another trail back, but the sun was starting to dip, and I didn't want to risk getting lost. I took a deep breath and walked forward, keeping my head down and trying not to make eye contact. As I got closer, though, he spoke up. "Nice day for a hike," he said. His voice was flat, expressionless, like he was just going through the motions. I managed to nod, muttering something about the weather, hoping he'd just let me pass. But he didn't move. "You come out here often?" he asked, stepping a bit closer. His hand was still in his pocket, and the way he held himself, it looked like he was gripping something. My skin started to crawl, but I tried to keep calm, acting casual even though everything inside me was screaming to get away. "Not really, just checking it out," I replied, keeping my voice steady. I didn't stop walking, hoping he'd take the hint. But as I passed, he turned, following me with his eyes. "You should be careful," he said. "Not a lot of people around here to help if something goes wrong." I felt a surge of panic, but I forced myself to keep moving, just nodding like I hadn't heard him. My car was in sight now, and all I could think about was getting to it, locking the doors, and getting out of there. But as I neared the parking area, I heard footsteps behind me. They were slow, unhurried, but they were definitely there. I reached my car, fumbling with my keys, trying to unlock it as fast as I could. The whole time, I could feel him getting closer. Finally, I got the door open, practically throwing myself inside. As I turned to shut the door, I saw him standing just a few feet away, watching me with this strange, blank expression. Before I could close the door, he leaned down, staring directly into my eyes. "Next time, maybe bring a friend," he said. There was something about the way he said it that made my skin crawl. It wasn't a suggestion. It was like he knew something that I didn't want to find out. I slammed the door shut and locked it, my hand shaking as I started the engine. He stood there, watching me, not moving an inch as I backed out of the parking space. I drove off as fast as I could, keeping an eye on him in the rearview mirror. He didn't try to follow, but he kept watching until I was out of sight. I didn't stop driving until I was well out of the park, back on the main road. Even then, I kept checking my mirrors, half expecting to see that van following me. The whole ride back, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd narrowly escaped something terrible. I don't know what he wanted, or why he was there, but I knew one thing: I'd never go back to that place alone again. It was a long time before I could get the image of his face out of my mind, and even now, every time I see an old white van, I feel that same chill. So, yeah, I went camping alone in Shenandoah National Park. I'd been there a couple of times with friends, but this time, I just wanted to get away by myself. Work had been rough, and I thought a few days with just my tent, the woods, and the quiet might help me clear my head. I got there just before sundown, found a spot off the main trails, away from other campers, and set everything up. The first night went smoothly. There were no strange sounds, no animals poking around, nothing but the usual rustling and chirping of the forest. By the time I woke up the next morning, I was feeling more relaxed than I had in weeks. I decided to hike around a bit, take some photos, and just let myself get lost in the scenery. When I got back to my camp that evening, though, something felt off. I couldn't put my finger on it at first. Everything was exactly where I'd left it, my gear, the tent, everything. But when I looked down at the ground near the entrance to my tent, I saw marks. They looked like strange little symbols, drawn in ash or something dark and powdery. I couldn't make out what they were supposed to mean. They were just shapes, rough and smudged, like they'd been drawn with a finger or stick. I figured maybe it was just from the fire pit, maybe ash had blown around while I was gone. I tried not to think about it too much, just brushed it off and went about starting my fire for the evening. But as I sat there, cooking my food and watching the flames, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I'd never felt anything like it before. It was like this constant pressure on the back of my neck, telling me to turn around, even though I knew there was nothing but trees and darkness behind me. Later that night, after putting out the fire and getting into my tent, I started hearing noises. Nothing loud, just light rustling, like someone was moving through the underbrush. I told myself it was just an animal, probably a deer or a raccoon, something like that. But the sound kept coming, closer and closer, until it seemed like it was right outside my tent. I barely slept that night. Every time I close my eyes, I hear another shuffle, another crack of a twig. When the sun finally came up, I crawled out of my tent, exhausted, only to find that the ash symbols were back. This time, they were all around my tent, more of them, drawn in that same smudged, messy way. They were on every side, like someone had been circling my camp during the night, leaving marks in the dirt. I was starting to get scared. I didn't think anyone even knew I was out there, and I hadn't seen anyone else when I'd hiked in. But I told myself maybe it was just some prank, maybe there were other campers nearby who thought it'd be funny to mess with me. I was about to start packing up when I heard a voice call out from the trees. I turned, and there was a man standing a little ways off, leaning against a tree. He looked like he'd been out there for a while. His clothes were rough, his beard was scruffy, and he had this strange look on his face, like he knew something I didn't. "You all right?" he asked. I nodded, trying to play it off like nothing was wrong. "Just packing up," I said, trying not to sound as freaked out as I felt. The man took a couple steps closer, eyeing the ash marks around my tent. He tilted his head, like he was studying them, then looked back at me. "Someone was here last night," he said. "I saw him. Thought it was you at first, actually, looked a lot like you, come to think of it." That set my nerves off. The way he said it, casual, like it wasn't anything strange that someone would be out here, making weird marks around a stranger's tent, and that they looked just like me. My skin was crawling, but I tried to stay calm, asked him if he knew who it was or where they'd gone. He shrugged, glancing around, then pointed off into the trees. Saw him heading that way when the sun started coming up. Don't know where they went after that. Figured they were just part of your group. I told him I was out here alone, hoping that would be enough for him to understand I didn't want company, but he didn't seem to get the hint. He just nodded, glancing at the ash symbols one more time, like he was committing them to memory. "You might want to be careful," he said, voice low. "Not everyone out here is friendly. Not everyone's got good intentions, you know?" I just nodded again, feeling the weight of his words settle in the pit of my stomach. The way he said it, it was like he knew something he wasn't telling me, like he knew who had made those marks and why. After he left, I packed up as fast as I could, not even bothering to eat. I kept glancing around, feeling like any second I'd see someone lurking in the trees, watching me. By the time I got back to my car, I felt like I was barely holding it together. I tossed my stuff in the back, ready to get out of there as fast as possible. But as I started the car, something caught my eye in the rearview mirror. There, on the back window, smeared in what looked like ash, was another symbol, the same one that had been around my tent. I'd been planning the solo trip for a while. Redwood National Park is one of those places you hear about, with trees so tall and thick it feels like stepping into a different world. I'd been hiking solo for years and thought I'd be fine. I'd mapped out a couple of trails I wanted to follow, some less common ones that wound deeper into the trees. I wanted a quiet, peaceful experience, just me in the forest. Everything was fine for the first couple of hours. The air was cool, the trees stood like silent giants around me, and there wasn't another person in sight. I'd kept my map tucked in the outer pocket of my pack, pulling it out every now and then to make sure I was on track. I didn't have any cell service out there, so the map was all I had. After stopping for a quick break, I reached back to grab the map and it was gone. I was sure I'd put it back, and I hadn't felt anything fall out, but the pocket was empty. I retraced my steps for a few hundred feet, figuring I'd just dropped it somewhere along the trail, but it was nowhere to be seen. I started to get this strange feeling in my gut, a mix of frustration and something else. I tried to shake it off, telling myself it was just a lost map, nothing more. I kept going, hoping maybe someone else on the trail would have seen it. After maybe another hour, I stopped at a clearing and sat down, deciding I'd take a breather and figure out what to do next. That's when I heard someone coming up the trail behind me. I turned and saw a man walking toward me, holding something in his hand. "Hey," he called out as he got closer, holding up my map. "This yours?" I nodded, relieved and a little confused. I hadn't seen anyone pass by, so I had no idea how he'd found it. "Yeah, thanks. I thought I'd lost it back there," I said, reaching for the map. He handed it over, but didn't move away. Just stood there, watching me with this odd look. He was smiling, but it didn't reach his eyes. They were dark, and there was something off about the way he held himself, just a little too still. "Saw it lying around," he said, shrugging. "Figured I'd bring it to you." I thanked him again, trying to keep it casual, but something about him was making me uneasy. I couldn't quite place it. He was just there, not looking away, not really blinking. After a few awkward seconds, he nodded and continued down the trail without another word. I watched him go until he disappeared around the bend, feeling my shoulders relax once he was out of sight. Then I looked down at the map, planning to check where I was. That's when I noticed the marks. They hadn't been there before. Small, faint symbols and lines, scribbled in what looked like pencil. They were messy, just a few lines and dots in odd places, leading off the main trail into areas I hadn't planned to explore. It was like someone had traced a different path, a winding route that I didn't recognize. A chill ran down my spine. I didn't remember seeing these marks when I'd first opened the map. I knew that map well. I'd spent hours studying it before the trip. These markings were new. I tried to brush it off, telling myself maybe I'd missed them, or maybe it was something left over from whoever had used it before me. But as I traced the route with my finger, a strange feeling started to creep over me. It was leading deeper into the park, off the main paths, away from where I'd planned to go. Against my better judgment, I decided to follow it. I don't know why. Maybe it was curiosity, maybe something else. But as I walked, that sense of unease grew stronger. The trees seemed closer together, the shadows darker. The air felt heavier, thicker, like it was pressing down on me. After about half an hour, I noticed the silence. No birds, no wind, just the sound of my own footsteps on the trail. I'd never felt so alone, so isolated. I stopped, looked around, and realized I wasn't on any recognizable trail anymore. Just a thin path winding between the trees, barely wide enough to walk through. I pulled out the map again, checking the markings. They led further in, twisting and turning in ways that didn't make sense. The deeper I went, the more the forest seemed to close in around me. My skin started to crawl, like I was being watched. I glanced over my shoulder, half expecting to see someone there, but there was no one. Then I heard a faint rustling, like footsteps behind me. I whipped around, but the path was empty. The sound stopped as soon as I turned, but my heart was pounding. I took a deep breath, tried to calm myself down, and kept going. A few minutes later, I heard it again. Closer this time. Footsteps, slow and steady, matching my pace. I turned again, and again there was no one there. Just the empty trail behind me, winding through the trees. I picked up my pace, gripping the map tightly. I didn't want to look at it anymore, didn't want to see those strange markings, but I couldn't let go of it either. It felt like the only thing keeping me grounded, even though it was the thing that had led me here. The footsteps kept following, always just behind me, stopping whenever I stopped, getting closer each time. I tried to convince myself it was just my imagination, just the sound of my own footsteps echoing in the silence, but deep down, I knew I wasn't alone. After what felt like hours, I stumbled into another clearing, breathless and on edge. I looked around, hoping to see a familiar landmark, something that would tell me I was close to getting back. But there was nothing, just more trees, stretching endlessly in every direction. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw movement. I turned, heart racing, and saw the man from earlier, standing at the edge of the clearing, watching me. He wasn't smiling this time. He was just staring, his eyes cold and unblinking. "How did you get here?" I stammered, my voice barely a whisper. He didn't answer. Just kept staring, his head tilted slightly, like he was studying me. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst. I wanted to run, but my legs felt rooted to the spot. Slowly, he lifted his hand and pointed down at the map in my hand, his finger tracing the same strange route I'd followed to get here. "You're not supposed to be here," he said, his voice low and flat. I turned and ran, not looking back. I didn't care where I was going, didn't care if I was following the path anymore. I just needed to get away. The forest blurred around me as I ran, branches scratching at my arms, roots catching at my feet. The footsteps were right behind me now, fast and relentless, keeping pace with every step. I don't know how long I ran, but eventually, I burst out onto a familiar trail, gasping for breath. I didn't stop, didn't look back until I reached the trailhead, where my car was parked. Only then did I turn around, half expecting to see him standing there, watching me. But there was no one. Just the empty trail stretching back into the trees, as if nothing had happened. I climbed into my car, threw the map onto the passenger seat, and drove away as fast as I could. I didn't look at it again until I got home. When I finally unfolded it, the strange markings were gone, vanished without a trace. I'd gone to Bryce Canyon by myself. I wanted to see the trails without too many people around, so I went out in the evening, closer to dusk. I figured if I timed it right, I could catch the sunset and then head back as the park closed, just like I'd done before in other parks. It was supposed to be a peaceful solo trip, the kind where you feel calm and maybe a little proud of yourself for being out there alone. The trail was mostly empty, which is what I was hoping for. Just a few people here and there, everyone mostly keeping to themselves, heads down, enjoying the scenery. The rock formations were stunning, and the whole place felt like something out of another world with the sun casting long shadows as it started to sink. I'd been on the loop for about an hour and only saw one other person out there. It was a man, somewhere up ahead. He looked like he was moving pretty slowly, maybe stopping to take pictures or just staring at the views like I was. He had this old, faded jacket on and a baseball cap pulled low, so I couldn't really see his face. I didn't think much of him until the sun got lower, and I decided it was time to turn back and head for the car. I remember passing him at one point as I turned around. He glanced at me briefly, didn't say anything, just nodded as I walked by. There was something a bit off about the look he gave me. I couldn't tell what, but I brushed it off as me just being paranoid. Maybe he was just surprised to see anyone out here alone that late. I kept walking, not looking back. It wasn't until I got closer to the entrance that I started feeling something was wrong. The shadows were stretching out longer and longer, and I hadn't seen anyone else for a while. I tried to shake off the feeling that I was being watched, telling myself it was just the quiet and the creeping dark getting to me. But every now and then, I hear a faint sound like footsteps on the gravel trail behind me. I glance back, see nothing, and keep walking. I thought it was just my mind playing tricks. After a while, I spotted the man again, standing further down the trail. He was just standing there, right in the middle of the path, not moving. I was still a good distance away, but he wasn't moving at all, like he was waiting for something. He had his hands in his pockets, head down, shoulders hunched. There was no one else around, and I was pretty sure the park would be closing soon. I figured he must have realized that too. I slowed my pace, hoping he'd start walking off to the side or just keep moving so I wouldn't have to pass him again. But he stayed right where he was. I kept walking, getting closer, feeling my skin crawl a little. Something about the way he was just waiting there made my stomach knot up. When I got close enough to really see his face, he lifted his head, and there was this strange smile on his face. It wasn't friendly or polite, not like he was just acknowledging someone else on the trail. It was more like he knew something I didn't, like he was just waiting for the moment I'd walk right into whatever he had in mind. "Park's closing soon," I said, trying to sound casual, hoping he'd just nod and keep going. But he didn't move, didn't say anything, just kept that smile, like he was sizing me up. I could feel my heart beating faster, but I didn't want to show any fear. So I just kept my pace, walking towards him, hoping he'd eventually step aside. But he didn't. As I got closer, he finally spoke, his voice low, almost like he was talking to himself. "You know, it's easy to get lost out here," he said, still smiling that strange smile. "A lot of places to slip. Hard to find someone if they don't know where to look." I felt a chill run down my spine, but I kept walking, trying not to react. I told myself he was just some weird guy trying to make conversation, maybe a little off, but harmless. But then, as I got closer, he took a step forward, blocking the trail entirely. He still had his hands in his pockets, just staring at me, not moving. "Excuse me," I said, trying to sound firm, but he just tilted his head, like he was curious about something. "You alone?" he asked, his eyes fixed on mine. The question caught me off guard, and I didn't know what to say. I wanted to lie, tell him someone was waiting for me just down the trail, but I felt like he'd see right through it. He kept watching me, like he was daring me to try to get past him. I didn't answer, just took a step to the side, hoping he'd move. But he mirrored me, stepping in the same direction, still blocking my way. My heart was racing now, my skin prickling with fear. I realized I was completely alone out here, no one around to see or hear anything. "I should get going," I said, trying to sound casual, like it wasn't a big deal. But he didn't move, didn't stop watching me. I could feel the air growing colder as the sun dipped lower behind the trees, casting everything in shadow. Finally, I forced myself to keep walking, brushing past him as close to the edge of the trail as I could get without losing my balance. He didn't try to stop me, but he stayed right there, just a few feet away, watching me as I passed. I could feel his eyes on my back, could practically hear the thoughts running through his mind. My hands were shaking, and I clenched them into fists, trying to keep myself calm. I walked faster, resisting the urge to look back. But then I heard footsteps behind me, slow at first, then speeding up. My heart felt like it was about to burst. I didn't dare turn around, didn't want to see his face again. I just kept going, picking up my pace, practically running as the trail twisted and turned through the trees. The footsteps got closer, and I could hear him breathing now, steady and calm, like he had all the time in the world. I ran faster, my lungs burning, my legs shaking, but I could still feel him behind me, following every turn, every step. Finally, I saw the trailhead up ahead, the parking lot beyond it. I bolted for it, not caring if he saw my fear, just desperate to get out of there. I sprinted to my car, fumbled with the keys, and threw myself inside, locking the doors the second I was in. I looked back at the trailhead, half expecting him to come out, still smiling that strange, unsettling smile. But there was no one there. The trail was empty, quiet, the trees casting long shadows over the empty path. I didn't wait to see if he'd come back. I started the car and drove out of there as fast as I could, heart pounding, hands shaking on the wheel. I didn't stop until I was miles away, back in town, surrounded by lights and people. Even now, I can still see his face, that strange smile, the way he blocked the path like he had every right to be there. I don't think I'll ever forget it. I'd gone out to Arches on my own, just for a quick day trip. I thought it would be a good break from work and all the other noise in my life. I planned to walk some of the easier trails and take photos of the rock formations. I was so sure it would be quiet, peaceful, just me and the rocks and the open sky. The morning started out exactly like that. The trails were empty, and I hadn't seen many people since I left the parking lot. The whole place felt open and silent, like it was untouched. Perfect. I wandered around for a while, taking pictures as I went, and I was really enjoying the solitude. I reached one of the big arches I'd wanted to see and sat down for a bit on a rock to take in the view. After sitting there for a while, I figured I'd take a few photos before moving on to the next spot. I had my camera, an older digital one I'd had for years, and took a few shots facing outward toward the arch, catching the shadows in the morning light. Then I figured, why not get one of myself with the arch? I'm not one for selfies usually, but this was a place I wanted to remember. I set up the camera on a rock a little ways away and put the timer on. I walked back to stand under the arch, felt the breeze on my face, and waited for the camera to click. I was smiling, feeling good, and the timer light blinked out as it snapped the picture. I went back, picked up my camera, and scrolled back to see the shots I'd taken. And right away, I saw something off. In the first picture of the arch, just the one with the scenery, there was something that hadn't been there when I'd set up the camera. There was a faint shadow behind me, not an object, but the shape of a person. It was hazy, almost like it could have been from my shadow, maybe caught at a weird angle. But then I checked the picture I'd taken of myself. There was someone behind me. Not off in the distance either. They were standing right there, maybe a few feet back, blurred a bit from the motion. They were behind my right shoulder, slightly off to the side. The figure was tall, definitely taller than me, and looked like they were just standing there, not smiling or anything. Just watching me. I froze, gripping the camera so hard my fingers hurt. I looked around immediately, scanning the rocks, the path, everywhere I could see. I was alone. I hadn't heard anyone approach, hadn't seen a single person the whole time I'd been up by the arch. There was no way anyone could have just come up behind me without making a sound, especially on this rocky ground where every step echoed. I couldn't breathe right for a moment. I tried to tell myself it was nothing, maybe a smudge on the lens or a weird lighting trick. I forced myself to flip through more of the photos I'd taken, but every single one was normal. Every shot was just the scenery and me alone, except that one picture with someone standing right behind me. I didn't want to stay there, not after seeing that. I felt exposed, like I was being watched. I packed up my things, slid my camera into my bag, and started down the trail, moving faster than I planned. I kept looking over my shoulder, expecting to see someone, but there was no one else around. As I walked, I tried to talk myself down, telling myself I was being ridiculous, but I couldn't shake the feeling. I kept glancing back, and I was so distracted I almost stumbled on the rocks a few times. About halfway back to the parking lot, I slowed down to catch my breath and pulled out my camera again, telling myself to just look at the picture one more time and try to figure out if it really was a trick of the light. I scrolled to the picture, zoomed in on the figure standing behind me. And that's when I noticed something else, something worse. The figure's head was turned slightly, like it was looking right at me. And the eyes, they weren't normal, not like you'd expect in a blurry photo. They were dark, but sharp enough that I could see them. And the more I looked, the less they looked like a person's eyes. They seemed too focused, too intense, like they were fixed right on me, even though I was staring at the photo. I was shaking. I stuffed the camera back in my bag and practically jogged down the trail. I kept glancing around, half expecting to see the person from the photo walking somewhere nearby, but there was still no one in sight. The path felt like it was stretching out longer than it should have, every rock and tree looking the same as the last. I had this sense of being watched again, and it felt like the air was getting heavier the closer I got to the parking lot. When I finally reached my car, I got in and locked the doors immediately, even though the parking lot was empty. I took a few deep breaths, but my heart was still racing. I decided to take a look at the photo one more time, even though I didn't want to. I had to see if I just imagined it all, if I was overreacting. I pulled out the camera, found the picture, and my stomach dropped. The figure was closer. They weren't standing behind me anymore, they were right up against me, close enough that if I had turned around, I would have been face to face with them. The figure's eyes were still locked on me, and there was something almost angry about the expression. Like they were waiting for me to notice them, like they'd been wanting me to know they were there. I couldn't look at it anymore. I shut off the camera, tossed it into the back seat, and got out of there as fast as I could. I didn't look back. I didn't even stop until I'd made it out of the park and onto the main road. For days afterward, I couldn't get that picture out of my head. I didn't look at it again, though, not until I'd gotten home. And when I finally did, the figure was gone. It was just me, standing alone under the arch like I'd planned. I don't know what I saw. I don't know if I imagined it, if it was some kind of strange trick with the light, or if someone was really there, watching me. But that feeling of someone standing just inches behind me, waiting for me to turn around, that hasn't gone away. Every time I go anywhere alone, I feel it now, like there's someone just out of sight, waiting. I've been hiking Mount Rainier alone, just taking a few days to clear my head. It wasn't peak season, so it was quieter, not packed like it gets in summer. I started the trail early in the morning, hoping to be alone with my thoughts. The first couple of hours were peaceful, just me, the trees, and the crunch of gravel under my boots. Around midday, I stopped to get some water and check my map, and that's when I noticed someone up ahead, a little down the path. A man, wearing a dark jacket and a cap pulled down low. He was just standing there, facing away from me, and I didn't think much of it. It's normal to pass people, even in the off-season, and he seemed like any other hiker. I set off again, kept to my own pace, and after maybe 20 minutes, I stopped to adjust my pack. That's when I noticed him again, this time behind me, farther back, but on the same trail. I brushed it off as coincidence. Maybe he was going at a slower pace or had taken a break somewhere along the way. I kept walking, but I felt myself getting a little more aware, checking back every so often. The third time I saw him, it was after another mile or so. I glanced over my shoulder, and there he was, at about the same distance. He was just standing there, like he'd stopped to take in the view, but it felt off. His head was turned a bit in my direction, and I felt the hairs on my neck go up. It was weird, and the way he just froze whenever I looked back at him started to feel deliberate. I sped up, putting more distance between us, and thought maybe I'd lose him. I even tried going off trail for a little, but the terrain was tough, and I didn't want to get lost or hurt myself. So I got back onto the main path, feeling a little stupid but telling myself it was just my nerves playing tricks. After all, people take breaks, slow down, look at scenery. It didn't mean he was following me. But each time I stopped or looked around, he was still there. And every time I caught sight of him, he was in some kind of pose, like he'd paused mid-action, pretending to check his pack or read his map. But his body was always turned slightly toward me. And every time I looked, he'd quickly look down or shift like he hadn't noticed me. I picked up my pace again, hoping to reach the lookout point where there'd likely be other people. After a while, I started to feel a little better, thinking I'd managed to lose him. But I kept looking back, unable to shake the feeling. That's when I saw him again. He kept up, and he was closer than before. He was facing away from me, leaning over a rock like he was tying his shoe, but I could feel his attention on me, the way his head angled slightly, like he was just waiting for me to look. I didn't want him to know I was scared, so I took my phone out, pretended to be checking something, acting casual. I took a quick photo of the path ahead and pretended to be focused on that, but my mind was racing. Should I confront him? I didn't know what I'd say, and I didn't want to get into any kind of fight out there with no one else around. I kept moving, glancing back less and less, just trying to ignore it. But I could feel him there, and every now and then, I'd hear a faint crunch of gravel somewhere behind me, like he was just a few paces back. Every time I turned, though, he'd stop, just standing still like he'd been frozen mid-step, never catching up, but never getting any farther away either. It was starting to get late, and I knew I didn't have much daylight left. I was regretting not bringing more supplies with me. I pushed myself faster, practically jogging, desperate to reach the end of the trail or at least a spot where I'd have cell service. I tried dialing out, but there was no signal. Finally, I saw the end of the trailhead up ahead. My car was parked just a little ways beyond, and relief washed over me. I glanced back one last time, hoping he'd be gone. But there he was, frozen again, a good distance behind but still close enough that I could make out the outline of his cap and jacket. I forced myself not to run. I didn't want to seem afraid. I walked briskly to my car, got in, locked the doors, and started the engine. I waited a few moments, watching the trail entrance in my rearview mirror. Part of me was hoping he wouldn't come out, that maybe I'd overreacted and made something out of nothing. But then I saw him, standing there at the edge of the trail, watching my car. He didn't move, he just stood there, like he was waiting for me to make the first move. I took a breath, put the car into gear, and pulled out of the lot, keeping my eyes on him in the mirror. As I drove away, I saw him step back into the trees, disappearing into the shadows. I went down to Everglades National Park to spend a day kayaking on my own. I liked the feeling of being out in the wild by myself. No people, no noise, just water, trees, and whatever wildlife decided to pop up along the way. The Everglades are thick and quiet, just all green and brown stretching forever. Most people take boat tours, but I wanted to go out by myself, move slow, take it all in. I started early. The air was sticky and warm already, but that's Florida for you. I had packed light, just a small bag with water, a snack, and my phone in a plastic case, just in case I dropped it in the water. It was quiet, that kind of quiet that feels thick and heavy. You could hear every little splash or rustle. It must have been around noon when I was deep into the trails, navigating through narrow channels where the trees formed a kind of tunnel over me. I stopped to get a drink of water, letting the kayak drift, and it was then I noticed the silence had changed. It felt different. Like it wasn't just nature sounds missing, but as if something else was there, watching. I glanced around, seeing nothing but trees, water, and the trail I'd come from. No other boats, no people. I took a deep breath and pushed forward, chalking it up to nerves. But not 5 minutes later, I heard a faint splash behind me, like a paddle dipping into the water. I froze, the silence returning right after. I looked over my shoulder, half expecting to see another kayaker, maybe someone who just liked the idea of solo kayaking, too. Nothing. I didn't move at first, just let the kayak drift while I listened. The water rippled behind me, like it does when something moves. I shrugged it off, telling myself it was just a gator somewhere nearby, moving around under the surface. I moved on, keeping a steady pace, but I couldn't shake the feeling. A little later, I heard it again, louder this time, a definite, rhythmic sound of paddling. It was close enough that I should have seen whoever it was, so I turned around again. The water stretched back, empty. No ripples, no kayak. Nothing. My pulse was picking up now, that jittery feeling you get when something's not quite right. I was about to call out, ask if anyone was there, maybe crack a joke if it was just someone being weird, but something stopped me. So, I kept paddling. The trail wound through tighter, denser channels, or even the light struggled to get through. But every time I ease up, listen, that sound of paddling was there, just out of sight. I tried changing up my speed, slowing down, then speeding up, trying to catch them, but every time I looked back, it was like they just disappeared. At this point, I was more than a little on edge. It didn't make sense. If someone was out here with me, I would have seen them by now. I paddled hard, hoping to leave whoever it was behind, but when I stopped again, there it was, that soft, steady splash behind me. And it was closer. This time, I spun around fast, searching for any sign, any ripple. And there it was, just a shadow, darting between trees, slipping around a bend in the water. I couldn't make them out, just the outline of a kayak, but it was enough to know I wasn't alone. I started to think I should turn back, but the thought of passing this person on the way made my stomach knot. I decided to just keep going, thinking the trail looped around eventually. The sound would fade, then come back, closer every time. The last time I heard it, it was almost right behind me. I kept glancing back, trying to catch a glimpse, but the kayak was always gone the moment I looked, like they knew the exact second I was going to turn around. I thought of yelling out, calling for help, but I wasn't sure who'd even hear me. My phone had no service, and I didn't want to stop long enough to try finding a signal. The sun was starting to sink low. I knew I didn't have much time before the light started to go. I paddled faster, my arms burning, eyes darting around for any sign of an exit. I was hoping I'd come across a ranger or another kayaker, but there was nothing, just the quiet and that steady, creeping sense of being followed. I came around a bend, and there, in the middle of the water, was another kayak. It was facing mine, dead still. I couldn't make out their face. They were wearing a white-brimmed hat pulled down low, casting a shadow. Their paddle lay across their lap, and they just sat there, waiting. I gripped my own paddle, heart hammering in my chest, wondering if they were going to say something, explain why they'd been trailing me. But they didn't move, didn't say a word, just kept their face down, hidden. Then, without a sound, they lifted their paddle and turned, slowly gliding back into the thick trees and shadows. It was like they wanted me to follow them, like they were leading me somewhere. But I stayed put, watching until their kayak disappeared around the bend, the water still behind them. I waited a few seconds before turning my own kayak and paddling in the opposite direction, faster than I ever thought I could. I didn't care if I was going the right way or not, I just wanted to get out, back to somewhere safe, anywhere with people. The sound of paddling came back again, but this time, it was moving away from me. I kept going, pushing hard, until finally, I saw the trailhead up ahead. I'd never felt such a mix of relief and terror at the same time. When I pulled up to the shore, I looked back one last time. The water was calm, no sign of anyone, like they'd never been there at all. I dragged my kayak onto land, barely stopping to catch my breath before making my way back to the car. As I loaded up, I kept scanning the trees, half expecting to see that figure standing somewhere, watching. But there was nothing, just the empty trail behind me, and the long, empty stretch of road out of the park. Went out to Canyonlands National Park to get away for a few days. No work, no phone calls, just me and the canyon. I was doing a solo backpacking trip, camping out each night along a pretty rugged trail that weaved through deep canyons and dry riverbeds. I planned the route carefully, mapped out a few sites where I'd set up camp each night. The solitude out there was perfect, just me and the open desert. The first night, everything went as planned. I made camp just as the sun was going down, cooked up some instant food over my little stove, and watched the stars come out. You don't see stars like that in the city. It's just you and the whole sky, stretching out forever. The quiet was almost heavy out there, like I was the last person on Earth. I slept soundly, without a single worry. It was the next day, mid-afternoon, when things started to feel off. I had just reached my second campsite, a small area by a dry riverbed under a large rock overhang. I set down my pack, went to clear a spot for my tent, and noticed something lying on the ground. It was a small piece of paper, folded in half and tucked under a rock. My first thought was that someone had left a trail note or directions, which sometimes happens on popular trails, but this area wasn't exactly popular. I was supposed to be miles from anyone. I unfolded it, expecting maybe a list of places to visit or warnings about wildlife, but instead, it just had 3 words written on it in thin, blocky handwriting: nice blue pack. I had a blue backpack. I looked around, feeling a strange prickle run down my neck. No one was supposed to be out here. I even double-checked the registration before I left. There hadn't been another permit for this trail in days. But still, I figured someone might have been here earlier, left a note as a joke, and moved on. Trying to shrug it off, I crumpled up the note and tossed it aside. It wasn't enough to spook me, not yet. That night, I was lying in my tent, listening to the wind whistle through the canyon. I felt a little restless, like I was listening for something without knowing what it was. Around midnight, I thought I heard faint footsteps, the soft crunch of rocks shifting. But when I unzipped the tent and looked outside, there was nothing there. Just shadows stretching out under the moon. The next day, I moved on. I told myself it was all in my head, probably just the emptiness out there messing with me. The wind, maybe, or some animal passing by. I set out early, determined to put it out of my mind and just enjoy the trip. But halfway through the day, as I rounded a sharp bend in the canyon, I saw it again, another folded piece of paper, held down by a stone. I picked it up with this sinking feeling, like my stomach dropped. I didn't want to read it, but I did. Did you sleep well? My hands went cold. I stood there, looking around, waiting for some kind of explanation to just appear in front of me, but it was all just rock and sky. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was left for someone else. Maybe I was reading too much into it. But there was no mistaking it now. Someone was following me, and they knew where I was staying each night. I stuffed the note in my pocket, feeling exposed out there in the open. My next campsite was still a few miles away, but I kept moving, kept checking over my shoulder every few minutes. Each time, it was just me, the empty trail, and the sun beating down. When I finally got to my next stop, I set up my tent in a narrow alcove, hoping it'd keep me out of sight. I checked the ground around the area, moving rocks and looking under shrubs, searching for anything that might have been left behind. For the first time since I started the trip, I felt like I couldn't relax. I kept hearing things, small rustling noises, like someone was nearby. That night, I barely slept. I lay awake, every small sound making my heart pound. By morning, I felt like a wreck. I packed up quickly and decided to cut my trip short. I didn't care about the rest of the trail, I just wanted out. I followed the path back, pushing through miles as fast as I could. By the time I reached what was supposed to be my first campsite again, the sun was sinking low, casting deep shadows through the canyon. And that's when I saw it, another note, placed right where I had planned to set up camp again. This one wasn't hidden, it was right in the open, waiting for me. I stared at it, feeling my hands shake as I reached down and unfolded it. Running won't help. My throat went dry. I scanned the cliffs above, looking for any sign of movement, any shape against the rock. But there was nothing, just silence stretching out around me, pressing down on me like a weight. I had this awful, creeping feeling that someone was nearby, close enough to watch me read that note, but far enough to stay hidden. I didn't stay. I grabbed my pack and pushed forward, not caring if the sun was almost gone. I figured I could make it back to my car by midnight if I kept going. Every few steps, I glanced back, expecting to see someone on my trail, but it was always empty. The wind picked up, howling through the canyon, and every now and then I thought I heard footsteps echoing behind me, faint and distant. I finally reached the end of the trail just past midnight. My car was the only one in the parking lot, and the sight of it felt like the biggest relief I'd ever felt in my life. I practically ran to it, threw my gear in, and locked the doors, heart pounding. As I sat there, catching my breath, I realized there was one last note tucked under my windshield wiper. I stared at it, too scared to reach out and take it. I almost drove away without reading it, but something made me roll down the window and pull it out. In the same thin handwriting, it said, "See you next time." I tore out of that lot and didn't look back. I don't know who was out there, how they were tracking me, or why they left those notes. But I haven't been back to Canyonland since, and I don't plan to go back alone ever again. I signed up for a tour of Mammoth Cave. I'd been to some small caves before, but Mammoth is something else entirely. It's huge. You walk for miles underground, twisting through dark corridors, with walls so tall that sometimes they're hard to even see. I'd heard stories about how people could get turned around down there, how you could feel lost with even one wrong turn, but I figured with the guided tour, there was no way that'd happen. They do this all the time, right? I trusted that I'd be fine. The tour group I was with had maybe 20 people in it, plus our guide, who kept a flashlight trained ahead of us as he led us down into the caverns. He'd stop every now and then to explain a feature, like a limestone formation or some old carving in the rock, and I tried to keep up, but I kept getting a little behind, stopping to look at things on my own. I didn't think much of it. I figured I'd catch up, or someone would notice if I strayed too far. There was one part where the path split in two directions, one side going up and the other down. Our guide pointed up, saying that was where we were going next, so everyone else started up the incline. I'd lagged a little again, but I was just about to follow when I noticed a narrow corridor to the side, just barely visible under the light. It wasn't part of the main path. It was almost hidden behind a large boulder, like it didn't want to be found. I don't know what possessed me, but I felt drawn to it. I don't know why I even thought it was worth exploring, but I took a few steps in, just to see. The rock walls were damp, and I could feel a chill creeping in the farther I went. I could barely see anything, just a sliver of light from where I come in, so after a few steps, I turned back, planning to rejoin the group. That's when I noticed the group was gone. No footsteps, no sounds, nothing. I hurried back, but there was no one at the top of the incline. Just me in the silence and the dark, stretching out in all directions. I tried to stay calm, but I felt this creeping panic in my chest. I told myself to follow the main path and I'd run into them soon enough. It was maybe 5 minutes later when I came to a dead end. That made no sense because the path was supposed to loop. I turned around, retracing my steps, but the whole way back looked different somehow. I walked faster, feeling that panic rise up in me again. I didn't know where I'd gone wrong or how I'd lost them so quickly. I took out my phone to try the flashlight, but I couldn't get a signal, and the battery was low. I told myself to keep moving, to focus. That's when I heard footsteps. They were soft but steady, getting closer. My first thought was that it was the guide, maybe someone coming back to find me. I felt this wave of relief, and I called out, my voice echoing against the walls. A figure came into view, a man. Not the guide, though. He was wearing a plain jacket, jeans, and he had this tired look on his face. "You lost?" he asked, his voice almost too casual. "Yeah, I got separated from the group," I said, hoping he was another lost tourist. "Do you know the way back?" He didn't answer right away. Just stood there, looking at me, like he was deciding something. "I can show you," he said finally. "It's easy to get turned around in here." I didn't have much of a choice. He was the only person I'd seen, and I didn't want to be alone anymore, so I nodded and followed him. We walked in silence for a while, his steps echoing ahead of mine. I kept waiting for him to lead me toward the main path, where I might hear voices again or see the light of the guide's flashlight. But the deeper we went, the darker it got. I asked him if he was part of the tour. He didn't answer, just kept walking, not looking back. I felt this creeping sense of dread, but I told myself it was fine. He knew the way, that's all that mattered. At some point, the air got colder. We were passing through narrower sections, some so tight I had to turn sideways to fit through. I kept thinking we'd get to a larger area soon, but it just kept getting tighter, more closed in. I felt the walls pressing in on either side, and I asked him again if we were going the right way. "Just a bit farther," he said, his voice low. But then he stopped. Turned around, looking at me with this strange smile. "You really should stay close," he said, "or you'll get lost again." His eyes, they didn't match the smile. They were cold, like he wasn't really seeing me. I felt my pulse racing. I tried to step back, but there was nowhere to go. He watched me, not saying anything, just waiting. That was the worst part, the waiting. I kept thinking he was going to say something, to move, to tell me what we were doing there, but he just stood there. And I couldn't breathe. I felt the walls pressing in around me. Finally, he turned and started walking again, and I followed because I didn't know what else to do. I kept close this time, close enough that I could hear his breathing, steady and calm. Too calm. Then he stopped again, in a part of the cave so dark that I couldn't see past a few feet. He turned to me with that same strange smile. "You know, it's easy to disappear in a place like this," he said, almost like he was talking to himself. I felt my stomach drop. I was trapped. I couldn't run. I didn't even know which way to go. I forced myself to stay calm, to think. Then, out of nowhere, I heard a voice echo through the caves, the guide's voice, faint but unmistakable, calling out for me. I shouted back, louder than I'd ever shouted, my voice bouncing off the walls, filling the space. The man's face changed. The calm smile faded, and he looked annoyed, almost angry. I didn't wait to see what he'd do. I turned and ran back, towards the echoing voice, not caring about the darkness, not caring about anything except getting away. I could hear him behind me, his footsteps close, but I didn't stop. I kept running, the guide's voice getting louder. I burst out into a larger area, stumbling and nearly falling. There was the guide, with the rest of the group gathered around him, their flashlights cutting through the darkness. I ran up to them, out of breath, feeling the tears sting my eyes. When I turned back, the man was gone. I told the guide what happened, that there was a man in the caves, but they didn't find anyone. They checked every section, every twist and turn, but it was just me in the group. They said I must have imagined it, that the darkness and isolation can play tricks on you. But I know what I saw. I know he was real, that he was there. The trip to Denali National Park had been a long time coming. I had wanted to see the vast wilderness, the towering mountains, and the sprawling landscapes. The plan was simple. I would hike solo, find some good spots, and soak in the beauty of nature. I had my gear packed, and I felt prepared for the adventure. The first few days went well. I followed the trails, set up my tent in the evenings, and enjoyed the crisp air. It was peaceful, the kind of quiet that made me feel small in the best way. I took pictures of the scenery, smiled at the occasional squirrel, and felt happy just being there. On the fourth day, I returned to my campsite after a long hike. I was tired but content. As I opened my tent, I immediately noticed something was off. My gear looked different, like someone had been messing around with it. My first aid kit was not where I left it. I searched through my things, and it hit me. My water filter was gone. I had made sure it was packed tight before I left. How could it just vanish? I felt uneasy, a knot forming in my stomach. I knew it was just me out here, so how could this happen? I scanned the area around my tent but saw no signs of anyone. Maybe I had misplaced it. Maybe I was just tired. I pushed the nagging feeling aside and decided to go to a nearby trailhead, hoping some fresh air would clear my mind. I started down the path when I saw a figure in the distance. He was a fellow hiker, moving in my direction. He had a well-worn backpack and looked like he had been on the trails for some time. He waved as he got closer. "Hey there," he called out. "Nice day for a hike, isn't it?" "Yeah, it is," I replied, forcing a smile. "Just enjoying the scenery." We chatted for a few minutes, and he told me about some great spots to check out in the park. He seemed friendly enough, so I decided to share my little mishap with my gear. I think someone tampered with my stuff at camp. My water filter is missing, and I'm not sure what to do. His expression changed for a moment. It was subtle but noticeable, like he was weighing his next words. "I can help with that," he said, his voice smooth. "I have a spare water filter if you need it." I hesitated. It seemed too convenient. "Really? You have a spare?" "Absolutely," he replied, pulling his backpack closer. "I come prepared. Let me show you." I followed him a little ways down the trail until we reached a small clearing where he set down his pack. He opened it and pulled out a shiny, new water filter. "Here you go. This will do the trick." I took it, unsure. "Thanks, but this seems like a big favor for just meeting." He laughed lightly, as if my concern was amusing. "I always carry extras. You never know when you might need something in the wild. You'll be glad you have it." Something in his tone set off alarms in my head. I tried to shake off the unease and told myself he was just being nice. But the knot in my stomach tightened. I thought about my other gear, how it had been moved around, and wondered if he had something to do with it. After some small talk, I decided to excuse myself and head back to camp. "I really appreciate this," I said, holding up the filter again. "But I should get going. I need to set up before it gets dark." "No problem at all. Just remember, if you need anything else, I'll be around," he replied with a smile. But it didn't feel genuine. As I made my way back, I kept looking over my shoulder, half expecting to see him following me. I finally arrived at my campsite, the air thick with tension. I went inside my tent, clutching the water filter tightly, trying to shake off the feeling of unease. I unpacked my gear, rearranging everything to make sure nothing else was missing. But then I noticed something. My first aid kit had been opened. The supplies inside were scattered, not just moved. It was as if someone had been searching for something. I felt my heart race as the reality sank in. Someone had been tampering with my gear. I looked outside but saw no sign of the other hiker. I forced myself to breathe deeply, reminding myself that I had not seen him again. I tried to focus on my surroundings, the sounds of nature settling me a bit. But it did not last long. As night fell, the anxiety returned. I decided to pack everything up and leave my campsite, moving to a more populated area in the park. I figured the trails near the visitor center would be safer. I took one last look around to ensure I had everything, and as I zipped up my bag, I felt a presence behind me. Turning around, I was met with the same hiker, standing a few feet away. "Hey, thought I might find you here," he called out, his smile wide, too wide. Yeah. Just getting ready to head out," I replied, trying to keep my voice steady. "Why would you leave? The night is so beautiful. You should stay. You can't miss the stars," he said, taking a step closer. "No, I think I need to go. I don't want to hike in the dark." He raised an eyebrow. "You really think you'll be safe out there? What if someone else finds you?" That line sent a chill through me. "I'll be fine," I said, forcing myself to move past him. I could feel my heart racing, fear pushing me forward. As I walked away, I could hear him behind me, still talking, but I didn't look back. I picked up my pace, moving toward the main trail, and then I heard it, the sound of his footsteps following. He was still behind me. The panic surged as I picked up my pace even more, my mind racing with what to do. I could not let him catch up. I didn't want to think about what he might do if he did. I came to a fork in the trail and quickly chose the left path. I had no idea where it would lead me, but it felt like my only chance. I heard him call out, "Hey, wait up." His tone was casual, but I could sense the urgency behind it. I ran, the trail uneven beneath my feet, my breath coming in quick bursts. I didn't stop until I reached a clearing where I saw a group of people gathered around a fire. Relief flooded over me. I stumbled into the group, breathless and shaken. The hikers looked at me, surprised by my sudden appearance. I turned back, and I saw the man at the edge of the clearing, watching me. He stood still, hands at his sides, but I could see the irritation on his face. "Everything okay?" one of the hikers asked, noticing my panic. "Yes," I managed to say. I got turned around. The man in the clearing offered me a spot by the fire, and I quickly took it, staying close to the warmth. I kept glancing back toward the edge of the light, but the hiker was gone. The group was friendly, and they offered me food and water. I told them a little about my trip, but I left out the part about the man. I didn't want to alarm anyone. As night fell and the stars came out, I sat with the group, feeling safe, surrounded by others. Eventually, I excused myself to set up my tent nearby. I could still hear the laughter and chatter from the fire, but I felt the weight of the day wash over me. As I lay down, exhaustion took over, and sleep came easily. The next morning, I packed up quickly, eager to leave the campsite. I needed to feel secure, surrounded by other hikers. I left no trace behind, hoping to forget the incident. But the memory of that man lingered in my mind. Denali had offered so much beauty, but it also reminded me to be careful. I learned that some encounters could change your perception of the world around you. I continued my hike, feeling a little stronger, but always looking over my shoulder. I never saw the man again, and I hoped I never would. I had looked forward to this camping trip for months. Crater Lake National Park had always been a dream destination of mine. The deep blue water, surrounded by cliffs and trees, was something I had wanted to see in person. I had planned everything carefully, the route, the supplies, and the campsite. I made sure to pack all my gear, food, and enough water for my stay. I arrived at the park in the late afternoon. The sun was still high in the sky, and I could feel the warmth on my skin. I found a good spot near the lake, away from the other campers, so I could enjoy the solitude. I set up my tent, organized my things, and took a moment to admire the view. The lake was breathtaking. It looked like something out of a postcard. As evening fell, I lit a fire, cooked a simple meal, and settled in to enjoy the peace. The sounds of nature surrounded me, the rustling leaves, distant bird calls, and the soft lapping of water against the shore. I felt content, grateful for this moment of escape. That night, I slept soundly. The stars were bright above, and the air was cool. I woke up in the early hours, needing to use the restroom. I stepped out of my tent, wrapped in my jacket, and walked over to the nearby bathroom facilities. I made my way back to my campsite, the moonlight illuminating the path. When I returned, I noticed something was off. My car, which had been parked neatly in its spot, looked different. I could see that it had been moved. I was certain I had parked it straight, but now it was angled, as if someone had pushed it slightly. My heart began to race. I looked around, hoping to see other campers nearby, but there was only silence. I approached my car to inspect it. The ground was soft, and I noticed fresh tire tracks in the dirt. It seemed clear that someone had indeed pushed it. I looked around for any sign of another person, but the area was deserted. I felt a chill run down my spine. I had seen other campers earlier, but now the place felt empty. I checked my belongings to make sure everything was in its place. My heart sank as I noticed my backpack was not where I had left it. Panic surged through me. Had someone taken it? I had left my phone and wallet inside. I searched around my campsite frantically, calling out softly, hoping someone would answer. The night was quiet. I felt isolated, vulnerable. The trees stood tall around me, their shadows creeping in the dim light. I decided I needed to get my things and leave. I was not about to spend another night feeling this way. I reached my car and got in. I locked the doors, looking around, feeling eyes on me even if there was no one there. I turned the engine on and slowly began to drive, keeping my eyes peeled for anything unusual. The road was winding and dark, but I needed to get to the park entrance. As I drove, I saw something move in my rearview mirror. A shadow. I looked back, but there was nothing. Just the darkness of the forest pressing close. My palms were sweaty on the steering wheel. I glanced back at the mirror again. This time, I thought I saw headlights behind me, but they disappeared just as quickly. I tried to convince myself that it was just my imagination, but anxiety clouded my mind. I drove faster, the road twisting and turning. Every bump and rustle made me jump. The quiet of the night felt heavy, filled with tension. I kept expecting to see someone standing by the roadside or in the trees. When I finally reached the entrance of the park, my heart sank in relief. As I approached the gate, I saw a ranger standing there, talking to another driver. I pulled over and rolled down my window. "Excuse me," I said, my voice shaky. "I think someone has been messing with my car at the campground." The ranger turned to me, his expression serious. "What do you mean?" "I was camping by Crater Lake, and when I got up this morning, my car had been moved. There were tire tracks like someone pushed it." "Are you sure you parked it like that?" he asked, but I could see the concern in his eyes. "Yes," I insisted. "I know I parked it straight. And my backpack is missing. I don't know what to do." The ranger nodded, his expression firm. "You did the right thing by coming here. It is best if you don't go back to that area. We have had reports of people camping out there after hours, and it can be dangerous." I swallowed hard, feeling the weight of his words. What should I do then? Drive to the nearest town. We will send someone out to check on your campsite. Make sure you report anything else that seems odd. I nodded, feeling grateful for his help. As I turned to leave, I caught a glimpse of the other driver looking at me, a shadow passing over their face. They seemed too interested in our conversation, and it made me uneasy. I drove away quickly, feeling the weight of what had happened hang over me. I drove to the nearest town, my heart still racing. The road felt longer than it should. I replayed the events in my mind, trying to make sense of what happened. It was supposed to be a peaceful trip, but instead, I felt exposed and afraid. I finally reached a small diner and parked my car, feeling a rush of relief to be in a place with people around. As I stepped inside, the bell jingled, and I looked around at the few customers scattered in booths. I approached the counter and ordered a coffee. I just needed to collect myself. While I waited, I glanced out the window. A figure passed by outside, someone in a dark jacket, moving quickly. I felt my stomach drop as they turned and looked straight at me. My breath caught in my throat. It was him, the man from the campground. I ducked down, hoping he hadn't seen me. I listened to the sounds of the diner, the clatter of dishes, the low hum of conversation. I dared a quick glance again, but he was gone. My heart raced. I needed to call the ranger again, but I was scared to be alone. The coffee came, and I took a sip, my hands shaking. I tried to focus on the taste, but it did little to calm my nerves. I could not shake the feeling of being watched. I needed to get out of there, find a safe place. After finishing my drink, I paid the bill and left the diner, my heart pounding with every step. I hurried back to my car, looking over my shoulder. I quickly got in and locked the doors. I had to get away. The thought of being alone in that campsite haunted me. As I drove away, I glanced in the rearview mirror one last time, half expecting to see him again. The road stretched ahead, and I promised myself I would never return to that place. Crater Lake was beautiful, but that beauty was now tainted by fear. I kept driving, focusing on getting to safety, where I could finally breathe again. I had been looking forward to my trip to North Cascades National Park for weeks. I needed to get away from the noise of the city, to find some peace by the water. The park was known for its stunning scenery, and I had heard the fishing was excellent. I arrived early in the morning, the air crisp and fresh, the sun just peeking over the mountains. I parked my car near the river and made my way down the path toward my chosen fishing spot, eager to cast my line into the water. It was quiet there. The only sounds were the gentle lapping of the water and the occasional call of a bird. I settled in, casting my line and letting my thoughts drift. Fishing always had a calming effect on me. I felt relaxed and at ease, just me and the river. After a while, I noticed movement further down the bank. A man appeared, walking toward me. He looked to be in his 40s, with a scruffy beard and a baseball cap pulled low over his eyes. I felt a twinge of unease as he approached, but I tried to dismiss it. Maybe he was just another fisherman looking for a spot. "Mind if I join you?" he asked, not waiting for an answer. Before I could respond, he set his gear down a few feet away from me and started setting up his rod. I smiled politely, thinking it was a bit strange, but I figured I could share the space. After all, it was a big river. "Sure, the more the merrier," I said, trying to keep it light. He smiled back, but it didn't reach his eyes. As he began to fish, he started making small talk. "Nice day for it, huh?" "Perfect weather," he said, glancing up at the sky. I nodded in agreement, hoping he would focus on his fishing. He cast his line and then turned to me, his gaze steady. "So, you come out here often?" "Not really. This is my first time here," I replied, trying to keep the conversation short. "Oh, really? What brings you to North Cascades?" He leaned in slightly, his interest seeming genuine but feeling a bit too intense. "Just needed a break from work," I said, keeping it vague. "Thought I'd do some fishing, enjoy nature." "Work, huh? Must be stressful," he said. He paused for a moment, looking at me as if he were waiting for me to say more. I shifted uncomfortably. "Yeah, it can be," I replied, feeling my patience start to wear thin. He smiled again, and it was just as unsettling as before. "You ever catch anything big?" "Not today," I replied, trying to redirect the conversation back to the fishing. I could feel my skin prickling. The man's smile faltered, and he seemed to contemplate his next words. "You know, fishing is a lot like life. You sit here and wait for the right moment, but sometimes you don't know what's coming." "Yeah, I suppose so," I said, trying to stay polite while my gut instinct told me to be careful. He leaned in closer, his voice lowering slightly. "You married? Got kids?" I was taken aback by the sudden intrusion into my personal life. No. "I'm single," I replied, keeping my tone even. "Just enjoying some time to myself." "Really?" he said, looking surprised. "I would have thought a guy like you would be settled down by now. You look like you've got it all figured out." "Not really," I said, trying to dismiss his comment. "Guess you have your reasons," he said, almost to himself. "You know, I can tell a lot about a person by their fishing style." I glanced at him, unsure what to say. "Is that so?" "Sure is," he replied, a grin spreading across his face that made me uncomfortable. "Like, if you cast like that, it means you're cautious. You're careful about your choices." I forced a laugh, trying to lighten the mood. "Maybe I just need more practice." He shook his head. "No, it's more than that. It's about how you handle your life. Some people take risks, others play it safe. You seem like the type who thinks too much." "Maybe," I said, hoping he would change the subject. "Do you think about your family much?" he asked, his tone shifting. I'm not really close with them, I replied, feeling increasingly uneasy. Why is that? He pressed, leaning in. I could feel my heart racing now. It's complicated, I said, wanting the conversation to end. He nodded, but his gaze was unwavering. Complicated is just a word people use to cover up what's really going on. Sometimes, it's easier to face the truth than to run from it. I took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. I'm not running from anything. I just prefer my own space. He chuckled softly, but it sounded almost sinister. Ah, but space can be a lonely place. You sure you don't want to talk about it? I'm fine, really, I said, forcing a smile. He kept watching me, and I felt exposed under his scrutiny. I couldn't shake the feeling that he knew too much about me already. The way he talked made it seem like he was drawing out information for a reason, and I didn't like it. Maybe you just need someone to talk to, he said finally, breaking eye contact to cast his line again. Not right now, I said, my voice firmer this time. He frowned slightly but didn't push further. I took the opportunity to shift my focus back to my fishing, hoping that he would take the hint and back off. Minutes passed, and the silence hung heavily in the air. I felt my tension ease a bit, but it was short-lived. The stranger suddenly stood up and walked a few steps away, pretending to examine his tackle box. I felt a rush of relief but also apprehension. It was too quiet. I quickly looked around. No one else was nearby. The river was still, the trees towering around us like silent sentinels. I felt trapped, my gut telling me I needed to leave. Hey, I think I'm going to head out, I said, standing up. Nice to meet you. He turned, surprise flashing across his face. Oh, already? You just got here. Yeah, but I've got some things to take care of, I said, trying to sound casual. He stepped closer, blocking my path slightly. Are you sure? I mean, it's a shame to leave when it's so nice out. I really have to go, I insisted, my heart pounding in my chest. He tilted his head slightly, considering me. All right. But it's always good to have someone to share the moment with. I nodded, forcing a smile as I slipped past him. I hurried to my gear, my hands shaking as I packed everything up. I felt his eyes on me the whole time, the weight of his stare making me feel vulnerable. Once I had everything in my bag, I made my way back to the path, not daring to look back. I could feel the air thick with tension, and I could sense he was watching me. I walked quickly, my heart racing. Each step felt like a countdown to something I couldn't quite grasp. I reached my car and fumbled for the keys, my fingers trembling as I unlocked the door and climbed in. I glanced in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see him standing there, but the road behind me was clear. I took a deep breath, trying to calm the storm in my chest. As I drove away, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had narrowly escaped something sinister. The man's questions replayed in my mind, each one more invasive than the last. I had gone to North Cascades for peace, but I left with a sense of unease that I knew would linger long after I returned home. The park was beautiful, but that beauty was now tainted by the shadow of that strange encounter. I realized I would think twice before fishing alone again. I drove away from the park, promising myself I would never forget the warning signs that had been so clear in hindsight. I had always wanted to visit Lassen Volcanic National Park. I had heard stories of its beauty and unique features, especially the boiling springs and the fumaroles. After weeks of planning, I finally set off for a weekend camping trip, eager to immerse myself in the natural world. I arrived in the early afternoon, excited to find a good camping spot. The park was not too crowded, which made it all the more appealing. After setting up my tent near a volcanic vent, I spent the day exploring. I walked along the trails, taking pictures of the bubbling springs and the smoke rising from the ground. It was surreal, like being in another world. As the sun began to set, I cooked a simple meal over my camp stove, enjoying the warm colors painting the sky. I could hear the distant sound of the wind whispering through the trees. As night fell, the temperature dropped, and I crawled into my tent, feeling cozy and safe. I planned to read for a while before sleeping, but soon I began to hear something outside. At first, it was just the sounds of nature, leaves rustling, the occasional snap of a twig. Then I thought I heard whispers. It was so faint that I could not make out any words, but it felt like someone was speaking just outside my tent. I froze, holding my breath, straining to listen. The whispers continued, soft and unintelligible, but they seemed to get closer. I wanted to believe it was just my imagination playing tricks on me, the sounds of the night amplifying my fears. I told myself to relax, but the whispers grew louder, almost like they were trying to convey a message. I gripped my flashlight tightly, heart pounding in my chest. I finally decided to call out. "Hello? Is someone there?" My voice sounded weak and small in the darkness. The whispers stopped instantly. I held my breath, waiting for a response, but the only sound was the rustling of the leaves. After what felt like an eternity, I convinced myself it was nothing. Maybe it was the wind or an animal. I turned off my flashlight and tried to calm my racing heart. I lay there for what felt like hours, too anxious to sleep but too exhausted to stay awake. Eventually, I drifted off, my mind filled with uneasy dreams. The next morning, sunlight flooded my tent, and I awoke feeling groggy and disoriented. The events of the night before felt surreal. I crawled out of my sleeping bag, stretched, and decided to investigate. I wanted to see if there were any signs of what might have been outside my tent. I stepped out into the bright morning light and immediately noticed something strange. There were footprints all around my tent, circling it in a tight pattern. They were not from my shoes. They were larger and appeared to be made by bare feet. The prints were deep and left clear impressions in the soft ground. I felt a chill run down my spine. I followed the trail of footprints with my eyes. They circled the tent, all pointing inward, as if someone had been walking around, watching me while I slept. My stomach twisted into knots. Who had been there last night? Why had they not entered the tent? I knelt down, studying the prints. They were not only circling my tent but were unusually close. Whoever it was, they had been watching me for quite a while. I quickly glanced around, hoping to see anything that would make this feel less sinister. I called out, hoping that someone else was nearby, but all I heard was the quiet of the forest. Feeling the urge to leave, I packed my gear quickly. My hands trembled as I rolled up my sleeping bag and stuffed my things into my backpack. I looked back at the footprints one last time. They did not lead away from my tent but stopped abruptly, like the person had simply vanished. I hurriedly zipped up my tent and headed for my car, my heart racing. I tried to shake off the feeling of dread that clung to me, but I could not ignore the sense of being watched. As I walked, I scanned the area, looking for any signs of life, but it felt eerily deserted. Once I reached my car, I threw my backpack in the back seat and locked the doors. I started the engine, wanting to put as much distance between myself and that campsite as possible. The whole experience felt surreal, like something out of a nightmare. I drove away, glancing in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see someone standing there, watching me leave. As I pulled out of the park and onto the highway, I took a deep breath. I tried to convince myself it was all just a weird experience, that I had let my imagination get the best of me. But deep down, I knew something was off. I would never forget the feeling of being watched or the chilling sight of those footprints circling my tent. The park, which had promised beauty and serenity, became a place of fear for me. I vowed never to camp alone again, knowing that the wilderness can hold mysteries that are far from comforting. I would always remember Lassen Volcanic National Park not for its beauty, but for the whispers in the night and the footprints left behind in the dirt. I had always been drawn to the outdoors. Hiking, camping, and being surrounded by nature was my escape from the busy life back home. When I finally got the chance to visit Great Basin National Park, I felt like I was stepping into paradise. The vastness of the night sky and the rugged mountains were mesmerizing. I planned a night hike, wanting to experience the park under the stars. The sun set slowly, and I started my hike just as twilight settled in. I had a flashlight strapped to my waist, and the beam of light flickered against the trees, illuminating my path. As I walked, the sounds of the night surrounded me, the rustling of leaves, the distant chirping of crickets, and the occasional call of an owl. It felt peaceful, almost magical, but something in the air felt heavy, as if the night was holding its breath. After hiking for about an hour, I reached a clearing with a view of the stars. I stopped to take it all in, the vastness of the universe stretching above me. I pulled out my phone to take a picture when I noticed a movement on one of the nearby rock outcroppings. At first, I thought it was just my imagination, but there it was again, a figure, waving at me. I squinted into the darkness, trying to see more clearly. The figure was standing on the rock, silhouetted against the night sky. They raised their arm again, a slow and deliberate wave, as if they were beckoning me over. My heart raced with excitement and curiosity. I had heard that it was common for hikers to encounter other people out in the wilderness, especially on popular trails like this one. I assumed this person might have a similar interest in the stars or was simply enjoying the solitude of the night. "Hello!" I called out, raising my hand in response. "Is everything okay?" The figure continued to wave, but I noticed something odd. They were not moving from that spot. No steps were taken toward me. The way they waved felt almost mechanical, like they were waiting for me to approach. A chill ran down my spine. Despite the unease creeping in, I felt compelled to investigate. I started walking towards the outcropping, careful with each step. The ground was rocky and uneven, and I felt a mix of excitement and dread. As I got closer, I called out again, "Hey, are you all right?" The figure was now barely visible. The moment I stepped onto the outcropping, I realized there was no one there. I stood frozen, scanning the area for any sign of movement. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, the thrill of the unknown turning into something darker. The air felt thicker, and I felt like I was being watched. Then I noticed the ground beneath me. The dirt was freshly disturbed, as if someone had been standing right there just moments before. There were footprints leading away from the rock, but they were erratic and scattered, like whoever had been there had moved quickly and in a panic. My breath quickened as I crouched down to examine the area more closely. The footprints were not from a hiker's boots. They were bare and left a clear imprint in the soil, leading deeper into the darkness. I glanced back at the path I had come from. It felt like a lifetime away, and the way back suddenly seemed daunting. I had always felt comfortable in nature, but now it felt like a trap. A cold wind swept through the trees, sending a shiver down my spine. I stood up, a deep sense of fear washing over me. I had to leave. I turned around, planning to retrace my steps, but I hesitated. I could not shake the feeling that I was not alone. I quickly made my way back to the trail, glancing over my shoulder. The darkness felt alive, as if it were watching me. I moved faster, adrenaline pushing me forward, and I tried to rationalize what I had seen. Maybe it was just someone playing a prank, or perhaps a hiker who had lost their way. But something deep inside me knew that this was different. The shadows around me felt longer, darker. I picked up my pace, my breathing coming in sharp bursts as I hurried down the trail. Every rustle of the leaves and snap of a twig made me jump. The more I hurried, the more the fear grew. I wanted to believe I was just overreacting, but it felt too real. When I finally reached my car, I fumbled with the keys, my hands shaking. I glanced around, expecting to see someone lurking in the shadows, but the area was quiet. I threw my gear in the back seat and locked the doors as soon as I was inside. I sat there for a moment, heart racing, trying to calm myself. I looked back at the trail, the darkness swallowing it up, and I felt a sense of relief wash over me. As I drove away, I could not shake the feeling that I had escaped something sinister. I tried to tell myself it was just my imagination, but I knew what I had seen. The figure waving, the disturbed earth, and the footprints leading into the night haunted me as I left the park. I would never forget the feeling of being watched, the quiet tension of the night, and the strange, unsettling encounter that pushed me to the edge. Great Basin National Park was meant to be a refuge, a place of beauty, but it turned into a nightmare I would carry with me long after I left. I promised myself I would never hike alone at night again, knowing that the wilderness can hold more than just nature. It can hold secrets that are best left undisturbed. I have always loved camping, especially alone. There is something freeing about being out in the wilderness, away from all the noise and distractions of everyday life. I decided to spend a weekend at Big Bend National Park, a place known for its beauty and solitude. I had my tent set up, and the vastness of the stars above was stunning. The peace of the night surrounded me as I settled in with a book, the flickering light of my lantern casting shadows around the campsite. As the hours passed, I started to hear sounds in the distance. At first, it was just the rustling of leaves, the sounds of the night. Then I heard laughter. It was faint but unmistakable, and it made me sit up in my sleeping bag. I listened closely, trying to determine where it was coming from. The laughter grew louder, mixed with voices, and it seemed to be coming from a nearby area. A knot formed in my stomach, and I felt a strange mix of curiosity and caution. It was late, but I felt compelled to investigate. I grabbed my flashlight, trying to push away the unease creeping in. I had been told that this park was safe, that the people who ventured here were usually friendly. I slipped out of my tent and walked towards the sounds, the beam of my flashlight cutting through the dark. The laughter guided me to a clearing not far from my camp. There, I found a group of people gathered around a bonfire, the flames dancing high and casting a warm glow on their faces. They were laughing and talking, their voices ringing out in the stillness of the night. I felt a bit relieved but also on edge. I was not expecting to find others this far out. As I approached, they noticed me and turned their heads. Their smiles were wide, and they waved me over. "Hey there. Come join us," one of them called out. I felt a mixture of warmth and wariness. They seemed inviting, but something about the way they looked at me made me hesitate. I stepped closer, trying to read the situation. The group was a mix of men and women, all looking to be in their 20s or 30s. They wore casual clothes, and their laughter seemed genuine. I was almost ready to sit down when I noticed how their eyes kept drifting towards my backpack. It was resting against a nearby rock, my only source of food and water for the night. "Nice backpack you got there," another person said, a grin stretching across his face. I forced a smile, trying to keep the mood light. "Thanks. Just some supplies for the night." They nodded, but the way they kept glancing at it made my skin crawl. I tried to change the subject. "What brings you all out here?" "We come out here often," a woman replied, her voice cheerful. "Just to get away from everything, you know? The stars are incredible here." "Yeah," I said, trying to sound enthusiastic. "I love the stars." But as I spoke, I noticed their smiles didn't quite reach their eyes. It was as if they were playing a part, and I was the audience. They invited me to sit by the fire, and I felt compelled to join them, despite my instincts telling me to leave. As I settled onto a log, the warmth of the flames enveloped me, and I felt a bit more at ease. But that feeling quickly faded as they resumed their conversation, laughter ringing out with an edge I could not place. "Hey, you should show us what's in your backpack," one of the men suggested suddenly. His tone was playful, but there was a seriousness behind it that made my heart race. I forced a laugh, feeling the tension rise in my chest. "Oh, it's just some food and a few supplies. Nothing special. Come on, we're all friends here." "Let's see it," he pressed, leaning forward, his gaze intense. I glanced at the others, and they all nodded, their eyes eager. A wave of unease washed over me. Something was off. This wasn't just friendly curiosity. "I really need to keep it safe," I said, my voice steady despite the fear building inside me. "It's important to me." The group exchanged glances, and I could feel the mood shift, their previous warmth fading into something colder. "Important, huh?" another man said, his voice low. "What's so important that you can't share it with friends?" I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I forced myself to smile, but inside, I was panicking. "Just some personal items. I promise it's nothing interesting." The laughter stopped. The fire crackled, and silence enveloped us. I could feel the weight of their stares, assessing, waiting. I needed to leave. "I should really get back to my campsite," I said, standing up abruptly. The group shifted, and the tension in the air became palpable. "Thank you for the invitation, but Before I could finish, one of the women stood up as well. "Wait. Don't go just yet. We were having such a nice time." Her smile was tight, and it felt forced. I turned, my heart pounding, and took a few steps back. "I really need to go," I said firmly, trying to keep my voice steady. Suddenly, the man who had first spoken stepped closer. "Come on, don't be rude. Just share with us. We only want to have a good time." I could sense the shift in their demeanor, the way they surrounded me like wolves closing in on prey. I took another step back, feeling the fear rise inside me like a wave. "Please," I said, trying to keep my voice calm. "I just want to go back." They paused, and for a moment, it seemed like they were reconsidering. Then the woman said, "Why don't you just let us take a look? We can help you with whatever is in there." I turned and ran. The laughter from behind me turned into shouts as I bolted into the darkness. I didn't look back, my heart pounding in my chest. I felt the fear propelling me forward, guiding my steps as I raced back towards my campsite. I stumbled through the trees, branches clawing at my arms, the night closing in around me. The path felt endless, and I could hear their voices behind me, but I didn't dare to stop. I burst through the clearing where my tent was set up, my breath coming in gasps. I quickly unzipped my tent and threw myself inside, zipping it up tightly behind me. I grabbed my phone, the only source of light I had left, and I huddled in the corner, trying to calm my racing heart. The laughter and voices from the bonfire faded into the night, but I did not dare to relax. I spent the rest of the night listening, waiting for any sign that they had followed me. When morning finally came, I emerged from my tent, the sun casting a warm glow over the park. I was shaken but relieved to see that the group was gone. I quickly packed my things, feeling the need to leave this place behind. As I drove away from Big Bend, the beautiful landscape blurred through the window. The adventure I had sought had turned into a nightmare. I vowed to be more cautious in the future, to trust my instincts. The wilderness was not just a beautiful escape, it could also hold dangers I never imagined. I left with a heavy heart, knowing that the night had changed something inside me forever. I decided to take a trip to Cuyahoga Valley National Park last summer. I needed some time away from everything, some solitude. I loved hiking, and the trails were beautiful. I parked my car at the entrance and picked a secluded trail that I thought would take me deep into the woods. The sun was bright, and the sounds of the forest were calming. I felt a sense of freedom as I walked, the smell of pine filling the air. After a few hours, I took a break. I found a nice spot by a small creek. I sat on a rock, dipped my hands in the cool water, and took a sip from my water bottle. As I relaxed, I heard footsteps approaching. I looked up, and my heart skipped a beat. It was Josh, my old friend from high school. I had not seen him in years. "Hey," he called, a broad smile on his face as he came closer. "Josh, is that you?" I asked, shocked. I could hardly believe it. We had lost touch after graduation, and I had no idea he was in the area. "Yeah, it's me." "I can't believe it." "What are you doing here?" he replied, looking as excited as I felt. We hugged, and I noticed he seemed different. His clothes were worn, and his beard was long and unkempt. There was a wild look in his eyes that made me uneasy, but I pushed it aside. "I just wanted to escape for a bit," I said. I needed to get away from everything. "Same here," he said. "I have been living in the park for weeks. It is amazing out here. You wouldn't believe how beautiful it is if you stick to the main trails. Come with me. I can show you the real beauty of this place." I hesitated. There was something about the way he said it that sent a chill down my spine. But I remembered our old friendship and how adventurous we used to be. "Sure, why not?" I replied. As we walked, he talked about his life in the park. He claimed he had been sleeping under the stars and living off the land. I listened, but I started to notice his behavior becoming a bit odd. He spoke in a hurried tone, and there was a wildness in his gestures. He pointed out every bird and every rustle in the bushes as if it all held some great significance. "Look," he said suddenly, stopping dead in his tracks. He pointed to a tree, excitement glowing in his eyes. "This is a perfect spot. The view is incredible from here. You can see the valley stretching for miles." I looked around. It was nice, but it didn't seem special. It was just another spot in the woods. "It's beautiful," I said, trying to match his enthusiasm. "Not just beautiful. It is alive," he insisted, his voice rising. "You can feel the pulse of the earth here. You just have to know how to listen." I laughed, trying to lighten the mood. "Right. I guess I'm just not tuned in yet." He stared at me, his expression suddenly serious. "You don't get it. You need to open your mind. You can't just walk the trails like everyone else." The air shifted, and I felt a wave of discomfort wash over me. "Okay, Josh. Show me what you mean." He smiled, and for a moment, it felt like we were back to being old friends again. But as we continued walking, he kept glancing at me, studying me in a way that made me uneasy. We reached a clearing where the trees parted to reveal a small pond. The sunlight glistened on the water, and I felt a momentary sense of peace. I was ready to sit and enjoy the view, but Josh had other ideas. This is where I come to think, he said, his voice low. You should swim. Feel the connection. I don't know. It's a bit cold, I replied, looking at the water. Come on. You have to dive in, he urged, almost pleading. I stood there, the urge to leave gnawing at me. Maybe later, I said, trying to keep my voice calm. Josh's expression changed. You don't trust me. It was a statement, not a question. No, it's not that, I said quickly. I just what? He interrupted, stepping closer, his voice rising again. You think I'm crazy, don't you? That I'm just some wild man living in the woods? No, that's not it. I raised my hands defensively. I'm just surprised to see you, that's all. His face softened for a moment, but it quickly turned back to anger. You don't get it. You need to see. You need to understand. I backed away slowly, the discomfort transforming into genuine fear. Josh, I think I need to head back. Back? He laughed, but there was no humor in it. You want to go back to that life? You can't go back. Why not? I asked, my voice trembling. He took a step towards me, his eyes wide and desperate. Because you are missing it. You don't see how beautiful it is here. The more he spoke, the more erratic his behavior became. He started pacing, talking to himself as if I was not even there. I was standing by the pond, my heart racing, feeling trapped. Josh, this isn't like you, I said, trying to reach him. We used to enjoy things together. Remember? He stopped pacing and stared at me, his expression shifting again. You don't understand the freedom. The beauty. You will never know if you go back. I need to go back, I said firmly, trying to sound brave. He lunged forward suddenly, grabbing my arm tightly. You can't leave. I need you to see. Panic surged through me, and I pulled away, breaking free from his grasp. Josh, let go of me. He hesitated, confusion flickering across his face. For a moment, I thought he might come back to reality. But then he stepped closer, eyes wild again. You are too far gone. I have to show you. I turned and ran. My feet pounded against the ground, adrenaline pushing me forward as I dashed through the trees, branches slapping against me. I didn't look back, but I could hear him behind me, calling my name, his voice echoing in the silence of the forest. I sprinted down the path, my heart racing, breath coming in gasps. I could hear him crashing through the brush behind me. I knew I had to keep moving. I felt the panic rising in my chest, but I refused to let it stop me. After what felt like an eternity, I spotted the trailhead ahead. I burst through the trees and onto the dirt path leading to my car. I could still hear him behind me, but I didn't stop to look. I fumbled for my keys, finally finding them in my pocket, and unlocked the door. I jumped inside, slamming the door shut, my heart pounding in my ears. I glanced out the window, and for a moment, I thought I saw him emerge from the trees, standing at the edge of the trail, watching me. His expression was a mix of anger and sadness, and I felt a twist of guilt. But I couldn't stay. I started the engine and drove away, my hands shaking on the wheel. As I left the park, I felt the weight of what had just happened settle on my shoulders. I had lost a friend that day, and I could only hope he would find his way back to himself. I drove for hours, the sun setting behind me, casting long shadows on the road. I knew I had to be more careful, to trust my instincts more than I ever had before. The wilderness was not just a place of beauty, it could also hide darkness that could consume a person. went hiking alone in Black Canyon of the Gunnison National Park last summer. I had heard about the park's stunning views and wanted to explore it on my own. There was something peaceful about being in the wilderness, away from everything. I parked my car at the trailhead and started my hike early in the morning, excited to see the sights. The sun was just rising, casting a warm glow over the canyon walls. I followed the trail, taking my time to soak it all in. The air was crisp and clean, and the sound of my boots crunching on the gravel was calming. I stopped now and then to take pictures, capturing the beauty of the towering cliffs and the winding river below. After a while, I noticed a woman about 50 yards behind me. At first, I thought she was just another hiker. She wore a bright red jacket, which stood out against the dark rocks and trees. I glanced back a few times, and each time, I saw her still trailing behind. She kept her distance but moved in the same direction as me. I felt a flicker of unease but tried to brush it off. Maybe she was just enjoying the same trail. I continued walking, but I could not shake the feeling that I was being watched. It was an unsettling sensation, like someone had their eyes on me. I quickened my pace, hoping to create some distance. Each time I looked back, I saw her, always there, always watching. It was like a shadow that refused to disappear. I decided to stop at a lookout point to take a break. The view was breathtaking, and I thought maybe some time alone would help me relax. I sat on a rock, pulled out my water bottle, and took a long drink. I listened to the sounds of nature around me, the rustling leaves, the distant chirping of birds. For a moment, I felt at peace. That peace shattered when I heard footsteps approaching. I turned to see the woman in the red jacket standing a few feet away from me. She smiled, but there was something off about it. "Hi there," she said. "I've been following you for a bit." Hi," I replied, trying to keep my tone casual. I didn't realize anyone was behind me. "I just wanted to make sure you were okay," she said, taking a step closer. "You know, hiking alone can be dangerous." "I appreciate that," I said, feeling a knot form in my stomach. "But I've hiked here before." Her smile widened, but it felt forced. "Still, it is always good to have someone watching out for you." I nodded, unsure of how to respond. "Thanks, I guess." "Do you come here often?" she asked, her eyes scanning my face like she was looking for something. "Not really. This is my first time at this park," I said, feeling more uncomfortable by the second. She took another step forward, closing the distance. "Oh, so you are from out of town? Where are you staying?" "Just in town for a few days," I said, trying to keep my answer short. "I have a hotel room." "What hotel?" she pressed, her tone shifting slightly. "I would rather not say," I said, my heart racing. I felt like I was being cornered, like she was digging for information I was not willing to give. "Come on, I just want to know more about you. I can help you if you are new here. There are some great places to explore." Her voice was sweet, but it held an edge. I felt like she was probing, trying to find a way in. "I'm fine on my own, really," I said, forcing a smile. She looked disappointed, but she did not give up. "What do you do for a living?" "Just a job," I said. I had no interest in sharing anything more. "Just a job?" She laughed, and it felt too loud in the stillness of the canyon. "Everyone has dreams, you know. What are yours?" I could feel her eyes on me, searching, and I started to feel trapped. I glanced around, hoping someone else would come along. "I think I should get going," I said, standing up. "Why don't you stay a little longer?" "You have no idea how beautiful it is here," she said, her voice dropping to a softer tone. "You can't rush these things." "I really should go," I said, stepping back. "Why are you so afraid?" she asked suddenly, her expression changing. "I just want to help you. You need to let me in." Her words made my skin crawl. I turned and started walking away, trying to stay calm. "Where are you going?" she called after me, her voice sharp now. "You can't just leave." I picked up my pace, fear flooding through me. I could hear her footsteps behind me, the sound growing closer. "I'm not following you," I shouted, trying to put distance between us. "Why are you running?" she yelled. "I'm just trying to help." I didn't look back. I could feel her gaining on me, the air feeling thick and heavy. I thought about my phone, about calling for help, but my mind was racing. I just needed to get away from her. I turned a corner on the trail, praying for a break in the trees or any sign of other hikers. Suddenly, I saw two people up ahead, walking towards me. I felt a surge of hope. "Hey!" I shouted, waving my arms. "Help!" The woman in the red jacket stopped in her tracks, her face contorting in anger. I sprinted toward the couple, shouting for them to come closer. "What is happening?" one of them asked, looking confused. "She's following me," I cried, pointing back at the woman. The couple turned, and the woman in the red jacket took a step back. "I was just trying to help her," she exclaimed, but her voice lacked conviction. "Stay back," I shouted, feeling a wave of adrenaline. The couple moved closer to me, forming a barrier. "Are you okay?" one of them asked. "Not really." "She won't leave me alone," I said, my heart racing. The woman in the red jacket narrowed her eyes, her expression shifting from feigned friendliness to something darker. "You don't need them. You need to trust me," she said, her voice low. "Get away from her," one of the hikers shouted. The woman stepped back, but I could see the anger in her eyes. "You will regret this," she said, and then she turned and walked away, disappearing back down the trail. I took a shaky breath, my body trembling. "Thank you," I said to the couple, who were now standing close. "I don't know what I would have done if you hadn't come along." "Just stay with us for a bit," one of them said. "We will walk you back to the trailhead." I nodded, grateful for their presence. The hike back felt longer than the way in, but I felt safer knowing they were beside me. I kept glancing back, half expecting to see the woman following us again, but there was no sign of her. When we finally reached the parking area, I could see my car and felt a rush of relief. I thanked the couple again before quickly getting in and locking the doors. I drove away, my heart still pounding. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the road as I left the park. I thought about how quickly things had turned, how a simple hike had become a terrifying experience. I promised myself I would never hike alone again. The wilderness could be beautiful, but it could also hold darkness, and I would be more careful in the future. The summer of last year, I went on a solo trip to Katmai National Park. I had always wanted to fish in the wild, where the rivers ran clear and the fish were plenty. I found a nice spot by the Naknek River, a place where I could cast my line and enjoy the tranquility of nature. The sun was shining, the air was fresh, and I felt at peace as I set up my gear. I settled in, casting my line into the water. The sound of the river flowing was soothing, and I could hear birds chirping in the trees. I was lost in my thoughts, enjoying the solitude. It was just me, my fishing pole, and the beautiful scenery. After a while, I caught my first fish. It was small, but I felt a rush of excitement. As I continued to fish, I noticed another angler nearby. He was on the opposite bank, standing in the water with a long fishing rod. At first, I did not think much of it. I could see he was focused, reeling in one fish after another with surprising speed. It was impressive, but something about the way he was fishing caught my eye. He seemed to be using strange techniques, moving his rod in a way that felt unnatural. Curiosity got the better of me, and I decided to approach him. I waded across the shallow water, trying to maintain a friendly demeanor. As I got closer, I noticed his clothes were worn and dirty, as if he had been living in the wilderness for a while. His hair was long and tangled, and he had a beard that was equally unkempt. "Hey there," I called out, trying to sound casual. "You're catching a lot of fish." He looked up at me, his expression blank. "Yes," he replied, his voice low and gravelly. "They are biting today." "Looks like you have a good technique," I said, attempting to keep the conversation light. "I'm still trying to figure this river out." He glanced at me, then back at his line. "You have to know how to lure them," he said, almost as if he was not talking to me but to himself. "They are more willing to bite if you play with them." I felt a chill run down my spine. "Right. I suppose that makes sense," I replied, not sure what to say next. He continued to reel in fish after fish, hardly looking at me. "What brings you here?" he asked suddenly, his tone shifting slightly. "I just wanted to do some fishing." "It's nice to get away from the city for a while," I said, trying to sound friendly. "City people don't understand," he said, a strange smile creeping onto his face. "They think fishing is just a sport. They don't know what it's really about." I felt my unease grow. "What do you mean?" He leaned in closer, lowering his voice. "You catch fish to survive, not for fun. There is more to it than just the catch. You have to respect them. You have to know their patterns." I nodded, trying to play along. "Sure, I guess I never thought about it that way." He turned back to his fishing, and I felt the silence stretch uncomfortably between us. I started to feel trapped, as if I had walked into a conversation I should not have. "What do you do with the fish you catch?" I asked, hoping to steer the conversation in a different direction. He looked at me, his eyes narrowing. "I take what I need. It is about survival out here." I felt my stomach twist. "That makes sense." "I plan to catch a few for dinner tonight," I said, trying to lighten the mood. "Dinner," he echoed, almost like he was tasting the word. "What if you do not catch enough?" I hesitated. "I will manage," I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. He leaned back, his expression unreadable. "Some people do not manage. They leave the wilderness with nothing. It can be dangerous if you do not know what you are doing." I took a step back, feeling the water lapping at my boots. "I think I'll be fine," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "Fine," he said, but the way he said it sent a shiver through me. "Just remember, it is not just about the fish. It is about what you take from the land." I did not like the way he was looking at me, like he was seeing right through me. I decided it was time to go back to my spot. "Well, I'll let you get back to it," I said, forcing a smile. He nodded but did not take his eyes off me. "You can come back any time," he said. "The fish will always be here. And so will I." I turned and quickly walked back to my side of the river, my heart racing. I tried to shake off the feeling of dread that settled in my chest. I cast my line again, but I found it hard to concentrate. The way he had looked at me, the things he had said, echoed in my mind. After a while, I started to pack up my gear, my hands trembling slightly. I wanted to get out of there, away from him and the uneasy feelings he stirred up. As I gathered my things, I glanced back at the other angler. He was still there, still catching fish, But now he was looking at me again, a grin spreading across his face. I quickly finished packing and decided to leave, hoping that getting in my car would ease my nerves. I walked quickly back to the trailhead, my heart pounding in my chest. Each rustle in the bushes made me jump, and I felt like I was being watched the entire way. When I finally reached my car, I fumbled with the keys, my hands shaking. I jumped into the driver's seat and locked the doors. As I started the engine, I looked in the rearview mirror. I expected to see him standing there, but there was only the empty parking lot. I took a deep breath, trying to calm myself down. I drove away from the river, grateful to be leaving that unsettling encounter behind. But as I made my way down the road, I could not shake the feeling that I was still being watched. Even as I left the park and returned to the town, I could feel the weight of that man's words hanging over me. The wilderness was beautiful, but it also had its secrets. And I was not sure I wanted to know what those secrets were. I want to share something that happened to me last summer while I was camping at Point Reyes National Seashore. I had been looking forward to this trip for weeks. I wanted to disconnect from the world, breathe the fresh sea air, and listen to the waves crashing against the shore. I found a lovely spot to pitch my tent, just a short walk from the beach, where I could fall asleep to the sound of the ocean. The first couple of nights were peaceful. I sat by the fire, watched the stars, and enjoyed my solitude. I thought I had made the perfect choice coming here. But on the third night, things took a strange turn. It was around midnight when I first heard it. At first, it sounded like the wind playing tricks, but then I realized it was whispering. I sat up in my sleeping bag, straining to listen. The voices were soft, barely audible, like they were just out of reach. I convinced myself it was just my imagination, or maybe the sound of the waves mixing with the wind. I told myself it was nothing. The next night, I heard it again. I sat up, heart racing, and listened closely. The whispering seemed to come from different directions, like it was surrounding my campsite. I felt a chill run down my spine. It was too late to leave, so I wrapped myself in my sleeping bag and tried to convince myself I was safe. But I could not shake the feeling of unease. I told myself it was probably just some other campers nearby, making noise. I tried to ignore it and fell asleep eventually, but I woke up multiple times throughout the night, feeling like someone was watching me. The third night, I decided I needed to find out what was going on. I stayed up late, waiting for the whispering to return. I had a flashlight ready, and as the hours passed, I began to doubt my decision. The moon was bright, casting shadows that danced in the trees around me. Just after midnight, the whispers came back. I gathered my courage and stepped outside my tent, flashlight in hand. I shone the light around, but I saw nothing. The beach was quiet except for the sound of the waves. I listened hard, trying to pinpoint the source of the voices. They were faint, but they felt close. I followed the sound down to the beach, feeling a mix of fear and determination. The whispers faded as I got closer, but I could still hear them, muffled like a conversation just out of earshot. I felt drawn to the sound, almost like it was calling me. Then, I saw something in the sand. Footprints. They looked fresh. There were several small prints leading away from my campsite, disappearing into the brush along the path. My heart raced as I followed them, each step making me feel more uneasy. I continued down the path, the whispers growing quieter until they vanished completely. I found myself at a hidden area, a small cove that was not visible from the main trail. It was secluded, and the air felt heavy. I shined my flashlight around and froze when I saw what lay before me. Scattered across the ground were personal items, a worn backpack, a pair of sunglasses, and a jacket that looked like it had been left behind in a hurry. I felt sick to my stomach. The backpack was unzipped, and I could see clothes spilling out, as if someone had just abandoned it. I picked up one of the sunglasses, and that is when I noticed something strange. There was a name written inside the case, and it was a name I recognized. I had seen it on the park's bulletin board. A woman had gone missing a few weeks ago. The whispers that had disturbed my night suddenly made sense, and fear gripped me. I took a few steps back, feeling a rush of panic. I wanted to get out of there, but I could not turn my back on the items. They belonged to someone who had vanished, and I realized I was standing in a place that felt wrong. I could almost feel the weight of their absence pressing down on me. I hurried back along the path, my heart pounding in my chest. I thought I heard footsteps behind me, but when I turned, I saw nothing. I reached my campsite and quickly zipped up my tent. I sat there, my flashlight in hand, listening to the silence around me. I stayed awake for the rest of the night, jumping at every noise. I felt like I was on high alert, convinced someone was out there. I listened carefully, expecting the whispers to return, but all I heard was the sound of the ocean and the wind rustling through the trees. As dawn broke, I knew I had to leave. I packed my gear quickly, my hands shaking. I kept glancing over my shoulder, feeling as if someone was watching me, waiting for me to make a mistake. I drove out of the park, not stopping until I reached the nearest town. When I got home, I reported the missing woman and the items I had found to the authorities. I hoped they could make sense of it all. I wanted to forget the trip, but the memory of that night still haunts me. The whispers, the footprints, the feeling of being watched. I never went back to Point Reyes. The beauty of the park turned into a nightmare, a reminder that nature can hide dark secrets. I still wonder what happened to that woman and if anyone ever found her. I want to share something unsettling that happened to me while hiking in Lassen Volcanic National Park last summer. I had always been drawn to the quiet and the beauty of the forests, but this trip took a turn I never expected. I set out early in the morning with my backpack and water, excited to explore the trails. The sun filtered through the trees, and the smell of pine was refreshing. I hiked for a few hours, taking in the scenery and enjoying the solitude. The trails were mostly empty, which was just how I liked it. I came across some scenic overlooks, took pictures of the landscape, and felt a deep sense of peace. But then I noticed a path that looked less traveled, almost hidden among the trees. It seemed to call to me, pulling me away from the main trail. After some hesitation, I decided to follow it. The path was narrow, overgrown in places, and I could hear nothing but the sound of my footsteps and the rustling of leaves. Eventually, I came upon a small, old cabin that looked abandoned. The wood was weathered, and the paint was peeling. A chill ran down my spine, but curiosity got the better of me. I approached the cabin slowly. The door was slightly ajar, and I could see dust motes floating in the beams of light streaming through the cracks. I pushed the door open, and it creaked loudly as I stepped inside. The interior was dark and musty, and my heart raced. It felt strange being in a place that seemed forgotten by time. I took a few cautious steps inside, and my eyes adjusted to the dim light. I noticed furniture covered in dust, a table in the center with old newspapers scattered about, and a fireplace that hadn't been used in years. It was eerie but fascinating. Then, I caught sight of something on the wall, a series of old photographs hanging in crooked frames. I walked over to examine them. Each photo was black and white, depicting various people posing in front of the cabin and around the park. They all looked familiar in a way I couldn't place. They seemed to be taken decades ago. I picked one up, and as I studied it closely, I felt a strange sense of recognition. There was a couple in the photo that looked just like my grandparents when they were younger. A sudden noise snapped me out of my thoughts. It sounded like footsteps approaching from outside. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. The hair on the back of my neck stood up. I strained to listen, but the footsteps were muffled by the leaves. Whoever it was, they were getting closer. Panic surged through me. I wanted to run, but my feet felt glued to the floor. I turned around, trying to look through the small windows, but they were too dirty to see through clearly. I took a deep breath, telling myself I was just being paranoid. It was probably just another hiker who had wandered off the main path. But as I stood there, I could hear the footsteps clearly now. They were right outside, shuffling on the ground. My mind raced with possibilities. What if someone had been watching me? What if they were hiding out here? I wanted to call out, to let whoever it was know I was inside, but the words caught in my throat. The footsteps stopped suddenly. I waited in silence, my breath shallow. I could feel my heart hammering in my chest. After what felt like an eternity, I summoned the courage to peek through a grimy window. The light outside was bright, and I squinted to see. I saw a figure standing by the entrance of the cabin, half hidden in the shadows of the trees. It was a man, tall and rugged, dressed in outdoor gear. He was looking straight at the cabin, but I couldn't see his face clearly. My stomach dropped. What did he want? I backed away from the window, trying to think. I needed to get out of there, but I was afraid of making noise. I took a few steps toward the back of the cabin, my mind racing. I could hear my own heartbeat echoing in my ears. Just then, the man stepped into the light, and my blood ran cold. He looked familiar. Too familiar. It was the man from one of the photographs on the wall. He looked the same, but the photo had been taken decades ago. I couldn't understand. How could he be here? The fear took hold of me, and I turned to find a way out. I spotted a small back door. I hurried toward it, careful not to make any noise. My hand shook as I grasped the doorknob and turned it slowly. It creaked, and I held my breath, praying he hadn't heard. When I opened the door, I saw the path behind the cabin leading back into the woods. I glanced back one last time and saw the man stepping closer to the cabin, his eyes scanning the inside as if he was searching for me. I dashed out the door and ran down the path as fast as I could, my legs pumping and my lungs burning. I didn't stop until I reached the main trail. I was gasping for breath, my mind racing. I looked back to see if he had followed, but I saw no sign of him. I kept walking, adrenaline coursing through my veins. The peacefulness of the park felt shattered, and every rustle of the leaves made me jump. I finally made it back to my car, heart still racing. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone had been watching me, that the man had been more than just a stranger. Once I was safely in my car, I drove away from the park without looking back. I still think about that cabin, the photographs, and the man who looked just like someone from my family. I never returned to that place, and I don't think I ever will. Some things are better left undiscovered, and some memories are best forgotten.